Some men you bury so deep inside yourself you swear they're gone forever. Lena Carter had done exactly that. 11 years of silence, 11 years of convincing herself the wound had closed. But wounds don't close. They just go quiet. And tonight, sitting across a candlelit table in the most expensive restaurant she'd ever stepped foot in, wearing sweatpants and broken sneakers, like a woman who had already decided to lose, she looked up, and every single year she'd spent trying to forget came crashing back in one single breath. Because the man standing at that table wasn't a stranger. He was the boy who had destroyed her. This is the story of two people who loved each other at the wrong time, lost each other in the worst way, and found each other again when neither of them was ready. If you've ever loved someone who hurt you, and hated yourself for still caring, stay with me until the end. Drop a like, and tell me in the comments what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The dress she'd been planning to wear was still hanging on the back of her bathroom door. A simple black dress, knee-length, something her mother had picked out 3 weeks ago with the specific energy of a woman trying to save her own life. It had a tiny white tag on the sleeve that read $34.99. Final sale. And Lena had looked at it every morning for 19 days without touching it. Tonight, she grabbed her sweatpants instead. Gray, faded, with a small bleach stain near the left knee from an incident involving a Halloween costume and a very poor decision about DIY distressing. She pulled them on, yanked a loose hoodie over her head, shoved her feet into the beat-up white sneakers she used for grocery runs, and looked at herself in the bathroom mirror for exactly 4 seconds. Perfect, she said flatly. Absolutely perfect. Her hair was doing something complicated and uninvited near her left ear. She didn't fix it. The restaurant was called Aurelius. She'd Googled it in the Uber on the way over and immediately felt her stomach drop. It had a waiting list. Not a reservation list. A waiting list to get onto the reservation list. The reviews used words like transcendent and architecturally breathtaking, and one person had simply written, "I will never be the same," which Lena found both dramatic and threatening. She was going to walk in there looking like she'd just come from a laundromat. That was the plan. That had always been the plan from the moment her mother had called 3 weeks ago, voice pitched at that specific frequency that meant things were worse than she was letting on. "His name is Ethan," her mother had said. "He's the son of Margaret Calloway. You remember Margaret? She and I used to work together at the salon before everything. She says he's been so lonely since, well, he's a good man, Lena. Just dinner. One dinner." Lena had said no 4 times across 3 phone calls. Then her mother had gone quiet in that particular way that wasn't dramatic or manipulative. It was just tired. The quiet of a woman who had been carrying something heavy for so long that she'd stopped expecting anyone to help her put it down. "The gas got cut off last Tuesday," her mother had said finally. "I've been using the microwave to heat water for washing." And that was it. That was the thing that got Lena into a car heading toward a restaurant she could never afford, wearing clothes specifically designed to make a wealthy man lose interest in under 5 minutes. She wasn't doing this to find love. She wasn't doing this because her mother deserved to believe in fairy tales at 61. She was doing this to get in, destroy any possibility of a second meeting, and get out, and then figure out how to help her mother without involving some billionaire son in his family's agenda. The plan was simple. Be impossible. Be so aggressively herself, the broke, tired, unsentimental version of herself, that no man raised in wealth would want anything to do with her. 5 minutes, 10, tops. The Uber stopped in front of Aurelius at 7:43 p.m. Lena looked at the entrance. There was a man in a suit standing at the door who appeared to be paid specifically to make people feel underdressed. She was about to give him a lot of material to work with. She got out of the car, shook out her slightly unwashed hair, and walked toward the entrance with the energy of someone who had absolutely nothing to prove. The doorman looked at her. She looked back at him. "Carter?" she said. "I'm meeting someone." He checked his list. Whatever he was thinking, he kept it behind a very professional expression. "Of course. Right this way." The inside of Aurelius was exactly as devastating as the reviews had suggested. The ceilings were absurdly high, lit from somewhere invisible, so the whole room glowed warm gold without any visible source. The tables were spaced far enough apart that people could have conversations in actual privacy, which Lena found both civilized and slightly alarming. There were flowers everywhere, Not the aggressive centerpiece kind, but quiet arrangements tucked into unexpected places, like someone had just set them down and forgotten them there. The whole place smelled faintly of cedar and something citrusy she couldn't identify. She hated how beautiful it was. The hostess led her toward a table near the far window. Lena was already composing her opening line, something dismissive, something that would signal immediately that she was not here willingly and had no interest in performing charm for anyone. And she was so focused on constructing the perfect sentence of disinterest that she almost didn't notice the man at the table stand up. Almost. He stood, and the sentence evaporated. Every carefully constructed plan she'd carried through 3 weeks in one very deliberate outfit choice simply stopped, like someone had reached into her chest and turned off the engine, because she knew that face. Not from photographs or social media or the kind of vague cultural awareness that comes with someone being publicly wealthy. She knew it the way you know the layout of a house you grew up in, not because you think about it, but because it's written somewhere in your body that remembers even when your mind tries to forget. The jaw that had once been softer, younger, now set and certain. The dark eyes that had always held something careful and slightly restless in them. The way he held himself, like someone who had learned to take up space but still occasionally remembered a time when he didn't. He was wearing a charcoal suit with no tie, the collar of his shirt open one button, and he looked like exactly the kind of man who had never once had to think about whether he could afford the restaurant he was standing in. He was Ethan. Ethan Calloway. The same Ethan Calloway who had stood in front of her 11 years ago in a room full of people who would never have considered her one of them, and said the words that had taken her 3 years and one very expensive therapy session to stop hearing in her sleep. She doesn't belong here. She never did. Lena's feet stopped moving. The hostess, apparently not noticing that her guest had essentially ceased functioning, said something pleasant and gestured toward the seat across from him, and then disappeared the way good restaurant staff do, efficiently and without being observed. Ethan. He hadn't recognized her yet. She could see that. He was smiling at her with the slightly cautious warmth of a man who had been told he was having dinner with a stranger and was trying to be gracious about it. His eyes moved over her, and she saw the slight flicker of surprise at the sweatpants. Brief, controlled, quickly neutralized. And he said, "Hi, I'm Ethan. I'm glad you came." His voice was the same. That was the thing she hadn't prepared for. The voice. Lena stood there for 2 full seconds that felt considerably longer, and then something inside her went very cold and very focused, the way it always did when she was frightened and couldn't afford to show it. She walked to the chair, pulled it out herself before anyone could do it for her, and sat down. "Lena," she said. "Not nice to meet you. Just the name, flat as pavement," as he sat back down across from her. Up close, she could see faint lines near his eyes that hadn't been there before, and something in his expression that hadn't been there at 21 either. A kind of weight that had nothing to do with exhaustion and everything to do with the specific gravity of a person who had lost something real. She hated that she noticed. "This place is a bit much, I know," he said, glancing around, and there was something almost apologetic in his voice. "My assistant made the reservation. I probably should have suggested something less intimidating," Lena said. He looked at her. "I was going to say formal." "Sure." A beat of silence, the kind that has texture. He picked up the menu. She didn't. "Have you been here before?" he asked. "No." "The food is actually really good. They do this—" "I'm not that hungry." He paused, set the menu down slightly, looked at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. It wasn't offended exactly, more like intrigued, which was the last thing she needed. "Okay," he said. "Can I ask, and tell me if this is too direct, is there something I did before I even got here? Because you seem like you'd rather be anywhere else in the city right now, and I'd rather know that up front than spend 2 hours pretending I don't notice." Lena looked at him. He held her gaze without flinching. That was new. The 21-year-old version of him had always looked away first. "You didn't do anything," she said carefully. "I just don't particularly want to be on a setup. My mother has ideas about my life that don't necessarily align with my own." "That's fair," he said. "For what it's worth, same." She hadn't expected that. "You didn't want to be here either?" she said. "I've been doing this for 2 years," he said. "The dinners, my friends, my mother's friends. Everyone has a cousin or a sister or colleague they want me to meet. I come because it feels like the right thing to do, and then I sit here and feel like I'm auditioning for a version of my life that doesn't really fit. He said it matter-of-factly, without self-pity, like he was just stating a fact about weather. Lena looked at the table. Do not feel sympathy for this man, she told herself firmly. Do not. The waiter appeared. Young, professional, clearly trained to handle the full spectrum of human behavior without reacting to any of it. His eyes moved briefly to Lena's outfit and then moved on with impressive discipline. Can I bring you anything to start? He asked. Water, Lena said. Sparkling or still? Tap. The waiter nodded without judgment. Of course. He looked at Ethan. I'll have whatever red you recommend tonight, Ethan said, and a sparkling for the table as well. Lena opened her mouth. It's not a power move, Ethan said without looking at her. I just like sparkling water and I'd rather not drink alone. She closed her mouth. The waiter left. Lena picked up the menu finally, mostly to have something to do with her hands, and looked at the prices without actually reading them. Somewhere in the neighborhood of what? And excuse me. So you work in film? He said. My mother mentioned costumes, Lena said. Not exactly glamorous. I pull clothes for other people to wear while actors pretend to be human beings. It's fine. Do you like it? Some days. What days? She glanced up at him. What? What makes a day good in your job? Like, what's the thing that makes you think, okay, today was worth it? Lena stared at him for a moment. It was not the question she'd been expecting. Rich men on set-up dinners usually asked where she'd gone to school or what kind of shows she worked on. Questions that were really just measuring tools disguised as conversation. When the costume actually changes how an actor moves, she said before she could stop herself. When you put them in the right thing and you can see it happen in real time, they stand differently, they hold their arms differently. The character stops being a concept and starts being a person. She stopped. That's the good days. He was watching her with an expression she recognized too late as genuine attention. She looked back down at the menu. I should tell you up front, she said, switching lanes deliberately. I'm not looking for a relationship. I'm not looking for anything, actually. I came tonight because my mother asked me to, and I love her, and she has terrible ideas. So if your mother's given you any kind of speech about, she told me you were sharp and funny and had good taste in movies, he said, which is more than she usually offers. She doesn't know me. She knows your mother. My mother thinks I'm funnier than I am and has questionable taste in film. The corner of his mouth moved. Almost a smile, but not quite. What's her favorite movie? Made in Manhattan. He laughed. It came out fast and genuine and surprise-sounding, like he hadn't expected it to, and Lena felt something shift in her chest in a way she deeply resented. She put the menu down. Look, Lena, I was going to say, you've been looking at me like you want to say something real ever since you sat down, he said. Not the stuff you're saying, something else. And I'm not trying to psychoanalyze you, I notice things. It's annoying, I've been told. The candlelight was doing something terrible to the planes of his face, making him look too familiar, too close to the image she'd spent 11 years dismantling in her memory until it stopped resembling anyone real. You remind me of someone, she said. The words came out before she approved them. He went still. Someone you know? He said. Someone I used to know. She picked up her water glass. It's not a compliment. He held her gaze for a moment that lasted too long. Okay, he said quietly. The food arrived. She hadn't ordered anything, but he'd apparently signaled someone while she wasn't paying attention, and the waiter set down small plates of things that looked beautiful and complicated and probably cost more than her electric bill. She didn't protest, mostly because she was suddenly very tired and something on the plate smelled incredible. They ate in silence for a minute that was strangely not uncomfortable. Then he said, Can I ask you something? You keep asking if you can ask. It seems polite. It delays the question. He considered that. Fair. He looked at her directly. Why the sweatpants? Lena set her fork down. Excuse me? The sweatpants, he said. And the sneakers. I'm not saying it as a criticism. You clearly put thought into it. The rest of you you're put together in every other way. Your posture, the way you talk, the way you're paying attention even when you're pretending not to. So the outfit was a choice. I'm curious what the choice was supposed to do. The silence that followed was the longest of the evening. Lena looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, I wanted you to end the dinner early. Why? Because I didn't want to be here. And yet you came. Because my mother needed me to. He nodded slowly. He stopped. That's actually one of the most honest things anyone's ever said to me at one of these things. Most people lie to you? Most people perform, he said. It's different. Lena felt something shift in the air between them. She didn't like it. She picked up her fork again, poked at something on her plate that turned out to be absolutely delicious, and tried to rebuild the wall of indifference she'd walked in with. It wasn't cooperating. You have a daughter, she said. It came out almost like an accusation. He blinked. How do you... Your mother told my mother, apparently. She looked at her plate. How old? 6, he said. His voice changed entirely when he said it, softened in a way that was so unguarded it was almost uncomfortable to witness. Sophie? She's 6. She has very strong opinions about breakfast cereal and an unreasonable attachment to a stuffed elephant named Gerald. Gerald. She named it herself at age 2, and we didn't intervene fast enough. Lena made a sound that was not quite a laugh, but lived very close to one's neighborhood. She's the best person I know, he said simply, not with the manic energy of a man trying to prove he was a good father. Just factually, the way people talk about things they're certain of. Lena put her fork down again, looked at the window. The city lights outside were doing the thing they always do in this part of L.A., that warm, gold-orange spread that looks like the city is half on fire and half in love with itself. She thought, get up. Walk out. You came, you showed up. It's enough for your mother. Get up now before this gets harder. She thought, he has no idea who you are. She thought, he said she doesn't belong here. He said it in front of everyone. He said it, and he didn't look back. I should go, she said. He looked up. We haven't had dessert. I don't eat dessert. Nobody who says that actually means it. I'm serious. You remind me of someone too, he said. The words landed quietly. No drama. No performance. He said it the way you say something you've been turning over in your head for most of a dinner. Lena's chair did not move. Someone I used to know, he continued. He was looking at the table now, not at her, which somehow made it worse. A long time ago, before... He stopped. Something moved across his face. Before I made some choices I can't undo. The restaurant hummed around them. Somewhere, a woman laughed at another table. A glass was set down. A server moved past with something that smelled like burnt sugar and citrus. You carry that around? Lena said. She hadn't meant for it to come out so soft. He looked up at her. Every day. She stood up then, quickly, before the softness could take root somewhere it shouldn't. She grabbed her bag, which was canvas and slightly falling apart at one strap, a fact she was acutely aware of in the golden light of Aurelius. I have to go, she said. Tell your mother it was lovely. My mother will hear the same. He stood too, which she hadn't expected. Not in a blocking way, just upright, present. Lena, he said, don't. I wasn't going to say anything significant. Then there's no reason to say it. She walked toward the door. Her sneakers were quiet on the polished floor. The man in the suit by the entrance moved to open the door for her, and she stepped out into the cool Silver Lake night air and kept walking until the restaurant's warm light was behind her and the ordinary dark of the city was all around her again. She stood on the sidewalk and breathed. Her phone buzzed. Her mother. How did it go? Is he nice? Did you wear the dress? Lena looked at the screen for a long time. Then she typed, he was fine. I left early. I'll call you tomorrow. She put the phone in her pocket and stood there while the city did its usual indifferent thing around her. Cabs going past, a dog barking somewhere up the hill, 2 people arguing affectionately about where to eat on the corner across the street. She told herself the tightness in her chest was anger. She was almost convincing. In the 9 days that followed, Lena worked. That was what she did when her interior life was making too much noise. She worked, she moved, she organized. She buried herself in the physical and logistical reality of other people's creative problems until her own faded to background static. She was in the middle of sourcing period-accurate 1960s secretarial wear for a mid-budget streaming project when her production coordinator, Becca, dropped a folder on her work table and said, "Big news, new campaign, commercial work, luxury hotel chain. The account is enormous. They want full creative, and they specifically requested someone with your eye for visual storytelling." Lena didn't look up from the rack she was sorting through. "When?" "Kickoff meeting is Thursday. The brand is Callaway Collection." The hanger in Lena's hand stopped moving. "Sorry," she said. "What did you say?" "Callaway Collection hotels? They're everywhere. The one on Sunset, the one in Santa Barbara. Super high-end. Apparently the owner himself wants to be involved in the creative direction, which is unusual, but who's the owner?" Lena asked. Her voice was extremely neutral. Becca checked her folder. "Ethan Callaway." The hanger resumed moving. "Great," Lena said. "I'll be there Thursday." After Becca left, Lena stood very still for approximately 30 seconds. Then she said to no one in particular, "Absolutely not." "What?" "She went to the Thursday meeting. She went because she was a professional, and because the account was significant, and because backing out would have required an explanation. She didn't have a version of that made any sense to give. She told herself she could handle this. She was a 30-year-old woman with a decade of working in competitive, difficult, personality-heavy creative environments. She had worked with directors who threw things, and producers who lied professionally, and an actor who once refused to wear anything with buttons for an entire 3-week shoot. She could handle sitting in a conference room with Ethan Callaway. He walked in 7 minutes late, which Lena noted not because she was keeping time, but because she'd been watching the door with the involuntary vigilance of someone waiting to be shot at. He was in a different suit this time, dark navy, slightly less formal, like someone had told him the meeting was creative adjacent, and he'd tried to dress accordingly. He had a phone in one hand and a coffee cup in the other, and a very slight look of someone who had started the day at 5 a.m., and had not been particularly gentle about it. He looked around the room, nodded to the production team, and then his eyes landed on Lena and stopped. There it was, the recognition, or the beginning of it. She watched him process her face in this context, in this room, without sweatpants. His expression shifted in ways that were very small and very readable to anyone paying attention. "You're the lead creative," he said. It wasn't a question. "Lena Carter," she said evenly. "Yes." A beat. He looked like he was about to say something, and then he looked like he'd decided against it, and then he sat down at the head of the table and set his coffee down and said, "Let's get started." He was professional. She would give him that. The next 2 hours were entirely business. Brand identity, visual language, campaign scope, audience targeting. He asked sharp questions. He pushed back on ideas he didn't think served the brand without being dismissive about it. When someone pitched something good, he said so without making it a bigger moment than it needed to be. Lena spoke when she had something to say, and didn't when she didn't, which was her standard operating mode in any room. At one point, across the long conference table, he said, "Carter, what's your instinct on the color palette? The team has 2 directions." She looked at the boards they'd pinned up. Both were safe. Both were competent. Neither of them said anything she'd remember in a week. "Neither of these," she said. "They're hotel catalog colors. They say expensive without saying alive. You want people to feel something when they see this campaign, not just recognize the price point." The room was quiet for a second. Ethan was looking at her. "What would you do differently?" "Warmer," she said. "Less gold, more amber. Let's look at this lobby. More you could belong here. There's a difference between showing people luxury and making them feel welcome inside it." He held her gaze for 2 full seconds. "That's exactly right," he said. "Start there." She didn't let herself feel anything about that. After the meeting, when the room had emptied and she was gathering her things, he came back through the door. She didn't look up. "I have another meeting." "I know," he said. "This will take 30 seconds. She straightened up, looked at him. "I didn't know it was going to be you," he said. "When the agency assigned the team, I want you to know that. It doesn't matter." "It does, a little." He wasn't being defensive about it, just even. "I also want to say, if this is uncomfortable for you, I can make a case for a different assignment. It wouldn't be—" "I'm the best person for this account," Lena said flatly, "and I'm not going to step aside because dinner was awkward." Something crossed his face. something almost like respect, moving quickly. "Okay," he said. "Good." She picked up her bag. "I'll have revised palette concepts to the team by Monday." She walked past him toward the door. "Lena." She stopped, didn't turn around. "I'm glad it's you," he said quietly. "On the account, for whatever that's worth." She walked out without answering, but she was thinking about his voice the entire drive home, and that was the problem. That was the specific, maddening 11-year-old problem she had absolutely no patience for and no good solution to. Because somewhere underneath the anger, underneath every carefully maintained layer of she was fine and she was over it, and it was a long time ago, and she was a different person now. Lena Carter was terrified. Not of Ethan Calloway. Of the part of herself that had looked across that conference table and felt just for a second like coming home. The revised palette concepts were on the team's shared drive by Sunday night, 11:43 p.m., because Lena had spent Saturday and most of Sunday at her work table surrounded by color swatches and reference images and 3 empty coffee cups that she kept meaning to throw away. She worked the way she always worked when something was bothering her, with the specific, obsessive focus of a person who has decided that if she makes the work perfect enough, the thing bothering her will eventually get bored and leave. It never worked, but the work always came out good. Monday morning, Becca forwarded her an email from Ethan's assistant. He'd reviewed the concepts over the weekend and wanted to discuss in person. Tuesday, 10 a.m., the Calloway Collection flagship hotel on Sunset. Lena read the email twice. Then she typed back a single word, confirmed, and closed her laptop. She told herself the tightness in her jaw was just Monday. The Calloway Collection flagship was the kind of building that made you slightly angry at it for being beautiful. 12 stories of warm stone and glass on Sunset Boulevard, with a lobby that managed to feel both enormous and intimate at the same time, which Lena recognized as a genuinely difficult design achievement and resented accordingly. The floors were pale travertine. The light came from sources you couldn't quite locate. There were fresh flowers at the entrance. Not the aggressive hotel lobby kind, but something quieter, arranged like someone had picked them that morning and set them down without overthinking it. She stood in the lobby for approximately 4 seconds, taking it in, and then made herself stop because she was here to work, not to admire the interior design choices of a man she was absolutely not thinking about. His assistant, a brisk woman named Diane, who radiated competent exhaustion in a way Lena found deeply relatable, met her at the elevator and brought her up to the 4th floor, where a long glass-walled conference room looked out over the hotel's interior courtyard. Ethan was already there, standing at the window with his back to the door, phone to his ear, talking in the clipped, efficient way of someone resolving something complicated in as few words as possible. He held up one finger without turning around. 1 minute, and Lena set her bag down and looked at the palette boards that had been printed and pinned to the wall. Someone had taken her digital concepts and rendered them at scale overnight, which meant he'd gotten them to a print house on a Sunday, which meant he'd been looking at this on his own time. She didn't know what to do with that information, so she filed it away and looked at the boards instead. They were better at scale. The amber tones she'd pushed for were warmer in print than on screen, and the secondary palette, deep green, brushed brass, something close to the color of old wood left in good light, had a coherence she was genuinely pleased with. It felt like a place rather than a brand. It felt like somewhere you'd actually want to be. "I've been staring at these since last night," Ethan said behind her. She turned. He'd put the phone in his pocket. He was in a white shirt today, sleeves already rolled to the elbows, which meant he'd been working for a while before she arrived. "What's the problem?" she asked. "There's no problem. I wanted to talk about how we extend this into the campaign." He moved to stand beside her, looking at the boards. Not too close, but close enough that she was aware of the space between them in a way she didn't particularly welcome. "The color is right. It does what you said. Makes it feel like somewhere people could belong, not just somewhere they can afford. I want to build the whole visual campaign from that idea." "Belonging is a strong concept for a hotel," Lena said. "Usually the luxury angle goes the other direction. Exclusivity. Not everyone can be here." "I know." He was quiet for a moment. "I've never liked that approach. It always felt, I don't know, cold, like you're spending money to be reminded of the hierarchy instead of actually resting." Lena looked at the boards and said nothing. "Sophie said something to me once," he continued, unprompted, in the particular voice of a person who isn't sure they should be saying something but is going to anyway. We took a trip last year, stayed at a competitor property. I won't say which one. Very high end. And she looked around the lobby and said, "Daddy, this place feels like it doesn't want us here." He paused. She was 5. Lena turned to look at him despite herself. "She wasn't wrong," he said. "And I thought, if a 5-year-old can feel that, then every adult walking through a lobby feels it too. They just don't say it out loud." The thing about Ethan Calloway, Lena was beginning to understand with significant reluctance, was that he said things that were real. Not performed real, not strategic real, actually real. Like someone who had either never learned to perform or had spent a long time getting tired of it. She turned back to the boards. "So you want warmth as the strategic core. Not luxury as a status marker, but belonging as an emotional promise." "Exactly. That's a harder sell to the marketing team. It's less obvious to measure." "Most things worth doing are harder to measure," he said. Lena picked up a pen from the table and started making notes on a yellow pad she'd brought in her bag. "I'll need access to the actual spaces. All the properties you want included in the campaign. I can't pull visual concepts from reference images. I need to be in the rooms, see the light at different times of day, understand how the spaces actually feel to move through." "Done," he said immediately. "I'll also need a point of contact at each property who can move things around without a 2-week approval process. I work fast and I hate waiting for bureaucratic sign-off on things that should take 20 minutes. I'll tell Diane to set it up. And the timeline is aggressive. Becca said 6 weeks for the first campaign deliverables. That's tight if you want this to feel considered rather than rushed." 8 weeks, he said. "I'll push the launch date." She looked up from her notepad. "You can do that?" "It's my company." Right. She kept forgetting that. Or not forgetting exactly. More like her brain kept trying to process him as just a person in a room rather than the person whose name was on the building they were standing in. 8 weeks, she said. "I can work with 8 weeks." They spent the next hour going through the campaign architecture, and she noticed again what she'd noticed in the first meeting. He was present in a way that was unusual for someone with his level of distraction available to him. His phone buzzed 3 times and he ignored it every time. When she was talking, he was actually listening, not waiting for his turn. When he disagreed with something, he said so directly and then actually absorbed her counterargument instead of just waiting for her to stop talking before repeating his original position. By the time they'd gotten through the preliminary framework, she'd filled 6 pages of her yellow notepad. "I think that's enough for today," she said, clicking the pen closed. "There's one more thing." He hesitated, which she noted because he didn't seem like someone who hesitated much. "I was thinking, for the residential suites campaign, the ones that are meant to feel like a home rather than just a room, I want the concept to be family-centered, not stock photo family. Actual warmth, actual mess, actual life." Sophie asked if she could be in it. He stopped. "I'm not using my kid as a marketing prop. I want to be clear about that." But she saw the boards, and she got excited, and he almost smiled. Strong feelings about being included in things. Lena set her pen down. "How do you feel about it?" "I think it depends on whether it serves the work or whether it's just sentimental. I don't want to do it if it's sentimental." "That's a very honest answer. I'm trying to be better at those." The sentence sat between them for a second with more weight than it was probably meant to carry. Lena picked up her notepad and stood. "Let me see the residential suites first," she said. "Then I'll tell you whether Sophie makes sense." "Fair enough." She gathered her things. He walked her toward the elevator, which she hadn't expected. She'd assumed he'd have Diane appear from somewhere and manage the exit logistics. But he walked with her, hands in his pockets, and they waited for the elevator in a silence that had stopped being uncomfortable sometime in the last hour without her explicitly noticing. The elevator doors opened. She stepped in. "Lena," he said. She held the door with one hand. "What?" He looked like he was considering something. Then, "You're very good at this. The work. I just wanted to say that." It was a plain, simple sentence. Nothing elaborate about it. She was aware that it should have been easy to accept and move on. "Thank you," she said, and let the doors close. In the elevator, descending, she stared at the brushed brass doors and thought about the fact that she hadn't told him yet. That he still didn't know. that every conversation they had was built on a foundation he was completely unaware of, and at some point the architecture of that was going to become a problem. She just didn't know what kind yet. The campaign work started in earnest the following week, and it turned out that spending every day in close proximity to someone you were trying to maintain careful emotional distance from was significantly harder than spending 90-minute meetings with them and then escaping to your car. They were at the Santa Barbara property on Wednesday, a low, pale building set back from the ocean with the kind of view that made you feel simultaneously small and very lucky. Lena was there at 7 a.m. because she needed to photograph the morning light in the suites before it shifted, which meant she was set up in the primary residential suite with her camera and a tripod and a takeout coffee cup when Ethan arrived at 8:30 to do whatever CEO-adjacent things he did when visiting a property. She heard him before she saw him, his voice in the hallway, talking to the property manager, low and efficient. Then he appeared in the doorway of the suite, saw her lying almost flat on the floor trying to get the angle of light across the wood floor, and stopped. "Good morning," he said. "Don't come in," she said. "You'll disturb the light." He stayed in the doorway. "Right. I need 4 minutes." "Take your time." She photographed. He waited. This was, in microcosm, the dynamic that had developed over the past week and a half. She needed something specific for the work. She asked for it without softening the ask, and he gave it to her without making it a transaction. It was the most functional working relationship she'd had in years, and she was trying very hard not to find it meaningful. When she'd gotten what she needed, she sat up and started reviewing the shots on the camera screen. He came into the room then, hands in his pockets, and looked around the suite with the particular expression of a person assessing something they're responsible for. "What do you think?" he said. "Of this one." "The bones are right," she said, still scrolling through shots. "The furniture is slightly wrong. It's too coordinated. Every piece talks to every other piece. Real homes don't work that way. Things accumulate. There's a lamp someone inherited, and a chair that doesn't quite match, and a blanket that got left out. This looks like a catalog spread." He was quiet for a moment. "I'll talk to the design team. Also, the light in here is extraordinary at 7 a.m., she said. "Whatever we shoot in this suite needs to be shot early. By 10, it's going to be flat." "Noted." He moved to the window. Outside, the ocean was doing its constant patient thing, gray-blue and enormous and completely indifferent to hotel campaigns and old heartbreak and whatever was happening in this room. "Can I ask you something?" "You're doing the thing again," she said. "What thing?" "Asking if you can ask." He half turned from the window. "Old habit. Go ahead and say no if you want." She set the camera down. "What's the question?" "When did you start doing this?" he said. "The costume work, the creative. When did you know that's what you wanted?" Lena looked at the window rather than at him. The question opened something she hadn't expected. "I was 17, she said. "I worked at a small theater for the summer. All I did was help organize the costume room, mostly. Hanging things, labeling, running to the dry cleaner. But one afternoon, the lead costumer let me help dress a scene. It was nothing, a small production. Community theater. But watching the actors put on those clothes and change, She stopped. "You just knew," he said. "I just knew." The quiet that followed was a different kind than the ones from before. Softer, somehow. "What about you?" she said, before she could decide not to. "The hotels. Did you always know?" Something moved across his face, complicated, layered. "No," he said. "The hotels were my father's. I inherited the infrastructure, and then I spent about 4 years deciding what to do with it." He looked out at the ocean. "My father built them as monuments, things to prove something. I've been trying to turn them into places people actually want to be in." He paused. "I'm not sure he'd approve. Is that important to you?" He considered the question seriously, which she appreciated. "Less than it used to be," he said, finally. They had lunch at a small place near the property that didn't know or care who Ethan Calloway was, which seemed to be precisely why he'd chosen it. A booth with vinyl seats and a laminated menu and a server named Carla, who called him Hon without ceremony and brought his coffee without asking how he took it, because apparently he came here enough that she remembered. Lena ordered a grilled cheese because she'd been up since 5 and had eaten nothing substantial, And she didn't try to order something impressively adult just because she was sitting across from a billionaire. She was past performing for him. She wasn't sure exactly when that had happened, but it had. Sophie wants to know if she can meet you, Ethan said, looking at his menu with the particular nonchalance of someone trying to make something sound casual that isn't. Lena looked up. What? She saw the color boards in my office. She said they were the best colors and asked who did them. He looked up. I may have mentioned it was someone I was working with. You told a 6-year-old about me. She asked. What did you say exactly? I said you were very good at your job and you had strong opinions and you scared me a little bit. He said the last part very matter-of-factly. Lena stared at him. I scare you? A little bit, in a productive way. He seemed slightly uncomfortable for the first time, which she found both surprising and satisfying. She said, and I'm quoting directly, Daddy, I need to meet her, so I'm passing along the message. You can say no, she'll survive. Lena looked at her menu, though she'd already decided. I'm not going to say no to a 6-year-old, she said. That's a terrible thing to do. It's not a terrible thing. It's fine, tell Sophie. She stopped. The name felt strange in her mouth, real and close, like something she hadn't expected to be allowed to say. Tell her I'm looking forward to it. When Sophie Calloway showed up at the Sunset flagship on a Thursday afternoon, Lena was in the middle of a minor argument with a lighting technician about the warmth setting on a portable rig, and she had a pencil behind her ear and paint samples taped to the back of her hand and was 3 coffees into a day that was calling for a 4th. Sophie had dark hair pulled into a ponytail that had escaped in approximately 4 places. She was wearing red sneakers and a sweater with a small embroidered duck on the breast pocket, and she was holding a stuffed elephant. Gerald, Lena recognized without needing confirmation, under one arm with the practiced ease of a child who has been carrying this particular animal for years. She walked into the room, looked around, and then looked directly at Lena. Are you the color lady? She said. Lena crouched down to her level. That's what they're calling me now? Daddy said you make things look like they feel, Sophie said, processing this with the absolute seriousness of a 6-year-old working through an important concept. I don't understand what that means, but I told him it sounded right. It sounds right to me too, Lena said. Sophie held Gerald out, apparently for inspection. Gerald thinks the green is the best one, from the boards. Lena looked at the stuffed elephant. Gerald has excellent taste. I know. Sophie clutched him back with the swift reflexes of a child who extended trust and then immediately protected herself. She looked around the room again. Can I help? Sophie, Ethan's voice from the doorway, carrying the specific tone of a parent who has had this conversation before. We talked about not, she asked politely, Lena said without turning around. She looked at Sophie. Can you hold a paint sample very still? Sophie stood up straight. Yes. Then you can help. She heard rather than saw whatever expression crossed Ethan's face. Sophie was already moving to stand beside her, very straight, with the concentrated gravity of someone who has been assigned an official task. Lena peeled a paint sample from the back of her hand and gave it to her. Hold this up next to the wall, Lena said, right there, where the light hits. Sophie did it, carefully, with extraordinary seriousness. Lena stepped back and looked. The sample was the amber she'd been debating for this particular wall. Warm, but not honey, alive but not overwhelming. Against the existing paint color, it was exactly right. Perfect, Lena said. Sophie beamed with the full-body joy of a 6-year-old who has been told she's done something perfectly. She turned to look at her father, hand still held steadily against the wall. Daddy, I helped. Ethan was leaning against the doorframe, and Lena finally turned to look at him. His expression was one she hadn't seen on him before, unguarded in a way that had nothing to do with her and everything to do with the small person holding the paint sample. Soft and tired and full of something that was too specific and personal for her to categorize. She looked away. Over the following 2 weeks, Sophie appeared 3 more times. Once at the Sunset property, when Ethan had clearly misjudged his childcare schedule and his sitter fell through. Once when Lena stopped by his office to review final artwork approvals and Sophie happened to be there after school, sitting on the floor of his office doing homework with the focused intensity of someone completing something very important. And once, unexpectedly, At the Silver Lake Farmers Market on a Saturday morning, when Lena was there buying absolutely nothing related to work, and rounded a corner with a canvas bag full of tomatoes, and nearly collided with Sophie going in the opposite direction at high velocity. Sophie had grabbed her arm to steady herself, looked up, and said, "Oh, you're here!" with the uncomplicated delight of a child who doesn't yet screen for appropriateness. Ethan had come around the corner behind her, slightly breathless from the pace of keeping up with a 6-year-old in a crowd. He'd looked at Lena over Sophie's head with an expression that was equal parts surprised and something else she didn't let herself name. "She moves fast," he said. "I have long legs," Sophie explained, which was objectively not true, but delivered with great confidence. They'd ended up walking through the market together for 45 minutes, because Sophie was apparently incapable of passing a fruit stand without deeply engaging with it, and because refusing to walk alongside someone you'd just been colliding with would have required an explanation. They'd eaten samples of 3 different kinds of jam that Sophie ranked with official gravity, and Sophie had held Lena's hand for approximately 6 minutes while they waited for Ethan to pay for a bunch of sunflowers, because a dog on a leash nearby had made her nervous, and Lena had been the closest available hand. It had been 6 minutes, and Lena was still thinking about it 3 days later in a way that made her angry at herself. That night, the Saturday of the farmer's market, Ethan had walked her to her car in the lot 3 blocks from the market, while Sophie slept against his shoulder with the absolute bonelessness of a child who has spent all her energy and cannot be bothered to help with even the minimum structural requirements. "She's out," Lena said, keeping her voice low. "She does this," he murmured. "One minute she's a full-functioning person, then she just powers down." He shifted her weight slightly, automatically. "She weighs more asleep. I think that's actually true, not just parenting mythology." Lena almost smiled. "Thank you for the afternoon," she said, unexpectedly. "Unexpectedly," he agreed. He looked at her in the yellow-gray light of the parking structure, the kind of light that is completely unflattering and somehow still managed to be too intimate. "She likes you," he said. "Sophie, she doesn't easily like people she doesn't know." "She liked me immediately." "I know." He said it simply. "That means something." Lena looked at her keys in her hand. She had approximately 15 things she should have said at that moment. Professional things, distance-maintaining things, reminders of the boundaries she'd been carefully rebuilding every time a conversation like this one started pulling at it. She had all 15 things ready. She said, "She's wonderful. You're doing a good job." He was quiet for a second. "I don't always know that," he said. "I know." She opened her car door. "But you are." She drove home. She didn't turn the radio on. The quiet was already full of too many things. By the end of the 5th week of the campaign, Lena and Ethan had developed the specific shorthand of people who have spent a lot of time working together in close quarters. The kind where half a sentence is enough, where a look across a room can mean this isn't working, let's rethink, where they'd stopped explaining the context of things because the other person already had it. It was the most efficient she'd ever been on a campaign. It was also the most consistently uncomfortable she'd been in years, because efficiency requires closeness, and closeness was the one thing she'd been trying to avoid. The late night started in week 4. The campaign was ambitious, and the timeline, even extended, was tight. And there were nights when Lena stayed in the Sunset Flagship's small creative workspace until 10 or 11, editing, revising, rebuilding. Ethan had an office on the same floor. She knew when he was still there because the light under his door stayed on. The first time he appeared at her door at 9:30 with 2 coffees, she looked up from her laptop and said, "Is that a peace offering or a bribe?" "It's coffee," he said. "You've been in here since 6. "I know when I got here." He set 1 cup on her table. "Can I look?" She gestured at the boards she'd been rearranging. He came around the table, not intrusive, just present, and looked at what she'd been building. The campaign's residential suite sequence, 10 images, all taken in early morning light, all anchored in the amber palette, all shot to feel lived in and real rather than aspirational and cold. There was one of Sophie's hands, just the hands, no identifying detail, holding Gerald on one of the beds, which had been Sophie's idea enthusiastically proposed, and Ethan's cautious approval and Lena's careful composition. "This one," he said, pointing to the 3rd image. A frame of a bed, unmade, late morning light across the pillow, a book left open face down on the nightstand. It was the simplest image in the sequence, and her favorite. "I know," she said. "What makes that one?" "The book," she said. "Someone put it down because they fell asleep, or someone came in and distracted them. There's a story behind it that doesn't require explaining. That's what makes a space feel inhabited. Evidence of the interrupted moment." He looked at it for another few seconds. "You think about things like that all the time, don't you?" he said. "The why behind the how something looks." "Doesn't everyone?" "No," he said. "They really don't." He sat down in the chair across from her work table, the chair that had been acquired from somewhere down the hall sometime in week 3, without anyone formally deciding he was allowed to sit there, but that he'd been sitting in regularly enough that it had unofficially become his chair in this room, which was a fact Lena had noticed and chosen not to address. "How's your mother?" he said. Lena looked up. "Excuse me? My mother mentioned—" He stopped, appeared to recalculate. "Sorry, that's intrusive." "It's fine." Lena wrapped both hands around her coffee cup. "She's okay. Better than she was a few months ago." She paused. "Some of the pressure's come off. The account we're doing, it's helped. The income." She said it without embarrassment, just factually, the way she'd learned to talk about money. Directly, without apology, without performance. He nodded. "I'm glad." She looked at her laptop screen. "You don't have to stay." "I know," he said. "I have a 12-page acquisition report waiting in my office." "Then why?" "Because acquisition reports are boring, and this isn't." He said it simply. "And because you've been in here alone for 4 hours." "I prefer working alone." "I know you do." He picked up his coffee. "I won't talk." He didn't, for almost 20 minutes. He read something on his phone, occasionally made a note in a small notebook he'd had in his jacket pocket, and was otherwise quiet in the particular way of someone who is actually comfortable with silence, rather than performing comfort with it. Lena worked. She was aware of him the way you're aware of a light on in the next room. Not distracting exactly, just there. Present. Part of the texture of the space. At some point she said, without planning to, "It bothers me that this is starting to feel normal." He looked up. "What is?" She gestured vaguely at the room, at him in the chair, at the 2 coffee cups. "This." He was quiet for a moment, then, "Does it have to be a problem?" "I didn't say it was a problem. You said it bothers you." "Those aren't the same thing." He looked at her steadily. "Lena, whatever happened, whatever you remember from before that I still can't quite reach, I'm not going to push, but I need you to know that whatever this is, I'm not treating it carelessly. I'm aware of what I'm doing, and I'm not doing it lightly." He set his coffee down. "That's all I wanted to say." Lena looked at him for a long moment. The late-night quiet of the building was around them. The distant sound of the city through the glass, the low hum of the creative suite's lighting, the occasional distant elevator. "You should be careful what you say when it's late and quiet," she said. "Things land differently." "Maybe they land more accurately," he said. She looked away first, back at the boards. "Go do your acquisition report," she said, but her voice had lost the edge she'd put in it. He stood, picked up his jacket from the back of the chair, moved toward the door, and paused. "That image," he said, meaning the one they'd been discussing, the unmade bed, the open book, the interrupted moment. "That's what I want the whole brand to feel like. Like someone just stepped out of the frame and they'll be back." She didn't answer because she didn't need to. He left. The chair across from her work table was slightly warmer than the room temperature because he'd been sitting in it, and that was an extremely simple physical fact that she absolutely refused to find significant. She went back to work. But her hands weren't quite steady on the keyboard, and she stayed another hour, not because the work required it, but because the drive home meant sitting alone with the thoughts she'd been successfully avoiding all evening. There were things she hadn't said, a name she hadn't spoken, a night 11 years ago she hadn't described, a version of herself she hadn't introduced, the 17-year-old girl in the wrong clothes at the wrong party who had loved someone she had no business loving and paid the full price for it. He didn't know. He was sitting across from her in that chair drinking coffee and saying careful, honest things, and he didn't know. And Lena was beginning to understand, with the particular dread of someone watching a dam develop a hairline crack, that not knowing was the one thing that could not last forever. The crack in the dam appeared on a Tuesday. It started small, the way these things always do, not with a dramatic moment, but with something ordinary that lands wrong. Lena was at the Sunset flagship reviewing final print proofs when Ethan's phone rang and he stepped out to take the call. And while he was gone, his laptop screen, angled toward her side of the table, lit up with an incoming email notification. She wasn't trying to read it. She wasn't looking for anything. But the preview line was visible, and her brain processed it before she could tell it not to. The sender name was R. Calloway. The subject line read, "Re. The girl. Did you ever find out what happened to her?" Lena looked at it for 2 seconds. Then she looked at the wall. Her heart was doing something uncomfortable and irregular in her chest. The kind of thing you notice and then try very hard to stop noticing because noticing makes it worse. She picked up her pen, set it back down, picked it up again. The girl. It could mean nothing. It probably meant nothing. There were 1,000 girls in 1,000 contexts in a man's life, and she had no reason, no rational, defensible reason, to assume the words on that screen were about her specifically. Except that she did have a reason. She had 11 years of reasons. Ethan came back into the room, phone in his pocket, and looked at the proofs on the table. "Sorry, where were we?" "The third panel," Lena said. Her voice came out steady. She was proud of that. They finished the review. She packed her bag. She drove home in the particular silence of someone who has been pretending all afternoon and is now alone with what they've been pretending about. She sat in her parked car outside her Silver Lake apartment for 11 minutes before going inside. She counted, because counting was something to do with the part of her brain that wouldn't stop working. The email had probably been from his mother, or a cousin, or someone running an old search. It was a common enough name, R. Calloway. His father's name was Richard, she remembered suddenly. Richard Calloway. The man who had stood in the doorway of his own son's life and rearranged everything inside it without asking. She got out of the car. She made dinner. She ate half of it. She went to bed at 10:30 and lay there until 1 a.m., watching the ceiling do nothing. And then she got up and sat at her kitchen table with a glass of water and thought about the night she'd spent 11 years trying to stop thinking about. She'd been 17. He'd been 18. They'd met the summer before his senior year at a fundraiser for the arts program at the community theater where she worked. He'd come with his family, she'd been there as part of the volunteer crew, and they'd ended up talking for 2 hours in a side garden while the event went on without them. He'd been funny and slightly nervous, and genuinely interested in everything she said, which was not a combination she'd been prepared for. She'd worn a dress borrowed from the costume department, a pale blue thing from the 60s that fit her almost right, and he'd said very simply, "You look like you belong somewhere important," which was such a strange thing to say that she'd asked him what he meant, and he'd said, "I don't know yet. I'll figure it out." They'd spent 3 months that summer finding out, texts and phone calls and afternoons at the library where she was doing her homework, and he was pretending to do his. He'd shown her things about his world without making her feel like a tourist in it, or he'd tried. She'd shown him the costume room at the theater, the way fabric held a story, the way putting something on your body could change the way you stood. He'd listened like she was teaching him something that mattered. She'd been 17. She'd thought that was what love felt like when it was honest. She hadn't known yet that honesty between two people doesn't protect you from the world around them. The party had been in October. A Calloway family event. One of those occasions that wasn't a party in any ordinary sense, but rather a structured demonstration of wealth and connection, held in the kind of house where you understood within 30 seconds that the architecture itself was making a point. Ethan had invited her. She'd understood later that he'd done it in the way that young people do things, impulsively, with hope, and without thinking through the consequences. He'd wanted her there. He hadn't thought carefully enough about what there meant. She'd worn the wrong thing, not wrong by any objective standard. She'd worn the nicest dress she owned, and she'd done her hair carefully, and she'd borrowed her mother's earrings. But wrong for that room, for those people, for the particular language of wealth that was spoken in the Calloway family's social world. She'd known it the moment she walked in and felt the air change around her. Not hostile exactly, but assessing. The eyes that moved over her and performed quick, invisible calculations. She'd found Ethan near the back of the main room, and he'd smiled when he saw her, genuinely. The kind of smile that comes before you remember you're supposed to be careful. And for 20 minutes, it had been fine. They'd talked, and she'd started to relax, and she'd thought maybe she'd been wrong about the air in the room. Then his father had appeared. Richard Calloway was a tall man who occupied space the way certain buildings do, through sheer size and the implication that everything around him existed in relationship to him, rather than independently. He'd looked at Lena the way she'd seen people look at things they were deciding whether to move or remove. Not cruel, exactly. Worse than cruel. Impersonal. He'd taken Ethan by the arm and steered him 6 feet away, which was close enough that Lena could hear every word. And whether that was deliberate or simply a man who didn't consider her worth lowering his voice for, she had never been sure. "I don't know what you think you're doing," his father had said, "but this ends tonight. You understand what I'm building here. You understand what you have to protect. This girl doesn't belong here. She never did. And you are going to tell her that." The silence that had followed was the longest of her life. She had watched Ethan's face. She had watched the thing that moved across it. The age-old war between who he was and what he was afraid to lose, compressed into about 8 seconds of visible, terrible conflict. She'd seen the moment it resolved. She'd seen what it resolved into. He'd turned back toward her. He hadn't met her eyes. "I think you should go," he'd said. "This was a mistake. I'm sorry." She had been 17 years old. She had stood there in her borrowed earrings and her nicest dress, and she had heard 8 words that rearranged something fundamental in her understanding of what she was worth in other people's worlds. She hadn't cried. Not then. She'd walked to the door on legs she couldn't feel and gotten into the car her mother had agreed to circle back for. And she'd said, "Take me home," in a voice that her mother had obeyed without asking questions, because she could hear something in it that didn't have room for questions. She'd cried in the shower at home for about 40 minutes. Then she'd stopped, because she'd decided that was the last time that would happen. 3 weeks later, her mother's job fell through, and they'd moved across the city for cheaper rent. And Lena had started at a new school and left behind everything, including the theater and the summer and the pale blue dress and the boy who had chosen correctly by the terms of his world and devastatingly by every other measure. Sitting now at her kitchen table at 1:15 a.m., Lena finished her water and thought, "He doesn't know who I am, and you can't keep not telling him." The production schedule had one more major shoot day, the flagship property on Sunset, the penthouse level, a full day that would complete the campaign's primary imagery. It was scheduled for Thursday. Lena confirmed it and showed up at 7 a.m. because that was what the work required. The day went fine. The light cooperated, the shots were clean, and by 4 in the afternoon she had everything she needed plus 20 minutes of footage she hadn't been planning for, but recognized as genuinely good when she saw it happening. The crew started breaking down equipment. The property staff moved back through the spaces, resetting them. The day began to quietly disassemble itself the way good shoot days do. Ethan had been in and out throughout the day, present for some of it, pulled to meetings for stretches, visible in the way he always was on site visits. Late afternoon, when most of the crew had gone and the equipment was loaded and only Lena remained in the creative space reviewing the day's shots on her laptop, he appeared in the doorway of the room and knocked on the open door. "Good day," he said. "Very good," she said. "I got everything we needed and some things I didn't know we needed." "Is that a good thing?" "Always." He came into the room. He was in his jacket, which meant he was about to leave, and he had the particular end-of-day energy of someone who had been going since early morning and was running on the last of their forward momentum. He looked at the screen over her shoulder. She angled it slightly so he could see, and looked at the images she'd been reviewing. "This one," he said. He pointed to a shot of the penthouse's floor-to-ceiling window. The city spread below it in the late afternoon light. An empty chair angled toward the view like someone had just gotten up from it. "This is the campaign." "I know," she said. They looked at it together for a moment. The city in the image looked the way it always looked at that hour. Like it was considering something. Like it was about to say something important that would take all night. "I need to tell you something," Lena said. She hadn't planned to say it at that moment. She had been planning. In the loose, non-specific way of someone who knows something must happen but keeps moving the date forward, to tell him sometime. Eventually. Soon. But the word soon had been sliding forward for weeks, and the email preview she'd seen on his laptop screen had been sitting in the back of her mind like an undetonated something, and she was very tired of carrying it. Ethan didn't move. He stayed where he was, slightly behind her, and said, "Okay." "Not here," she said. "I need—" She closed the laptop. "The warehouse space on the second floor, the one they use for storage. I walked through it last week and it was empty." He looked at her for a moment. Reading something in her face, she could tell, though she didn't know what he was finding. "All right," he said. They walked there without talking. The second-floor warehouse space was exactly what it sounded like, a large, mostly empty room that the property used for event furniture storage, currently holding several stacked folding tables and a collection of boxed linens and not much else. The windows were high and industrial, and the rain that had started in the last hour was audible against them, a steady gray sound that filled the space without being loud. Someone had left the low emergency lights on, which gave the room a dim, amber quality that was nothing like the designed warmth of the rest of the hotel. Lena stood in the middle of the room. Ethan stopped a few feet away and waited. She turned to face him. "I know you," she said. "Not from the dinner, not from the campaign. I knew you before all of this." She watched his face. Something shifted in it. Not recognition yet, but attention, the kind that goes very still. "My name has always been Lena Carter. My mother's name is Diane Carter. 11 years ago, we lived in the Fairfax neighborhood, near the community theater on Melrose. I worked there the summer I was 17. She watched him. The color changed in his face. Not dramatically. He wasn't a man who went pale or made large physical gestures in response to things. But something behind his eyes moved, and moved significantly. "I volunteered at a fundraiser," she said. "There was a side garden, and I talked to a boy for 2 hours while the event went on without us. He told me I looked like I belonged somewhere important." Her voice was steady. She'd had 11 years to practice being steady about this. "We spent 3 months that summer figuring out what that meant." Lena. Her name came out of him like something that had been held under pressure and finally released. Just the one word. Just her name. "And then there was the party in October," she said. "And his father said, loud enough for me to hear, that I didn't belong there. That I never did. And the boy, who was 18 and scared and probably had very good reasons by the logic of his world, turned around and told me it was a mistake. That I should go." The rain against the high windows was the only sound in the room. "That was me," she said. "I'm that girl." Ethan stood completely still for what felt like a very long time. His jaw was tight. His eyes were on her face with an expression she didn't have a word for. It wasn't guilt exactly, and it wasn't surprise, not anymore. It was more like a man watching something he's been braced for in the abstract arrive in the specific, and finding that the specific is much harder than the abstract prepared him for. "I know," he said quietly. Lena's breath stopped. "What?" "I know who you are." His voice was rough at the edges. "I've known for about 3 weeks. The room rearranged itself slightly around her. 3 weeks, she repeated. "I recognized you after the second campaign meeting. Something about the way you talked about costumes, about the thing you said, putting something on, changing the way you stood. You said that to me once, in that costume room. Exactly that." He exhaled. "I wasn't certain at first. You're different, older. You carry yourself differently. But I couldn't shake it, so I looked you up. Not your professional history, your mother's name, the address on Melrose." He paused. "It was you." Lena looked at him. "You've known for 3 weeks," she said, "and you didn't say anything." "I didn't know how." "You didn't know how." The anger came up fast, the way it does when it's been compressed for a long time. "You've been sitting in that chair in my office every other night with your coffee and your honest sentences and your careful words, and you knew, and you didn't—" "What was I supposed to say?" he said. "That I recognized you, and I'm sorry, and I know sorry doesn't touch it? That I've been trying to figure out how to be in the same room with you without—" He stopped himself, pressed his hand against the back of his neck. "I didn't want to make it about me. I didn't want to come at you with my guilt and make you manage it. So instead you just—" "I know it was wrong," he said. "I'm not defending it. I'm explaining it." She turned away from him, looked at the high windows and the rain against them. Her hands were shaking slightly, and she put them in her jacket pockets where he wouldn't see. "I need you to understand something," she said, with her back to him. "I was 17 years old. My mother and I had nothing, Genuinely nothing. The kind of nothing that means you make calculations every month about which bill can wait. And I always knew that you were from a different world and I didn't belong in it. I knew that. But she stopped, breathed. I believed you when you looked at me like I was worth something. That's the part I couldn't forgive, not the leaving. The making me believe first. She heard him move. Not toward her, just a shift of weight, a rearrangement. You were worth something, he said. His voice was unsteady in a way she'd never heard from him. You were worth more than everything I had. I knew that then, and I was too afraid and too weak to act on it. Being afraid doesn't... I know it doesn't. He said it quickly, not as an interruption, but as an agreement. I'm not asking you to excuse it. I'm not asking for anything. He paused. My father came to me that night after you left. He told me what I'd done was correct and necessary, and I sat in that house and I hated myself, and I told myself the hatred was sufficient. It wasn't. It was never close to sufficient. Lena turned back around. His face was open in a way she hadn't seen before, not the careful openness of someone who has decided to be honest, but the unguarded exposure of someone who has run out of the energy required to keep things covered. He looked older than he had at the restaurant on the first night, and younger, and exhausted in a specific way that had nothing to do with the hours he'd been keeping. I looked for you, he said. Afterward, not immediately. I was 17 and stupid, and it took me about 3 months to understand what I'd actually done. But then I looked. Your mother's job was gone. Your apartment was empty. I tried the theater. I tried people who might have known her. I found nothing. He said it without self-pity, just as fact. I went to college, and I married someone, and I built a company, and every year I thought about it less. And every year, what was left was more concentrated, like whatever's left in a bottle after most of it evaporates. He looked at her. You were the most real thing that ever happened to me before I understood what real meant, and I destroyed it because I was 18 and terrified of my father. The rain was harder now against the windows. Somewhere in the building below them, something mechanical cycled on and hummed. I ruined the only real thing I ever had, he said quietly. That's the truth. There's no better version of it. Lena stood there and let the words land. She'd imagined this conversation for years, not as a specific plan, more the way you imagine impossible scenarios as a way of processing them. She'd imagined saying devastating things. She'd imagined watching him understand. She'd imagined feeling powerful in it, or at least relieved. She didn't feel powerful. She felt wrung out and tired and younger than she'd felt in years, in a bad way. 17 again, in the worst possible sense, standing in a borrowed dress that almost fit. Your wife, she said, because something had been sitting at the edge of her thoughts since the dinner, and she needed to say it. What happened? His expression changed. She passed away 3 years ago. It was sudden. A brain aneurysm. We didn't know she had a condition. She was 30, and Sophie was 3, and it was... He stopped. It was the worst thing I've ever been through. And I was in it alone, mostly. I had people around me, but grief is a room you're in by yourself, no matter how many people are standing outside it. I'm sorry, Lena said. I know you are. He looked at her steadily. I don't want you to feel sorry for me. I just want you to know that I'm not someone who takes people for granted lightly. I learned what loss costs. She looked at the floor. The concrete was old and slightly uneven, and somebody had painted it gray a long time ago, and it had worn thin in the middle where feet had passed. What do you want from me? She said. It came out more direct than she intended. Not theoretically. Right now, in this room, what do you actually want? He was quiet for a moment, not the hesitating quiet of someone trying to find the right thing to say, but the thinking quiet of someone actually considering the question. I want you to stop carrying this alone, he said. Whatever you've been doing with it for 11 years, the anger, the armor, the careful management of everything. I want you to put some of that down. Not for me. For you. He paused. And I want to be someone who's earned the right to still be in your life after what I did, even if that just means doing good work on the same account and getting coffee at 9:30 because you've been in the office since 6. She looked at him. That's what I want, he said. I'm not asking for more than that. Something broke open in her chest. Not dramatically, not the way things break in movies, with music and catharsis. More the way something breaks that's been under pressure for a long time. Quiet. Almost imperceptible. The hairline crack becoming a fracture. "I was so angry," she said. Her voice came out different, not the steady, controlled voice she'd been using since this conversation started. Smaller, more tired. "For years I was so angry, and then I got busy, and the anger got buried under everything else, and I thought that meant it was gone. But it wasn't gone, it was just compressed." "I know." "You don't get to just say sorry and have it be enough," she said. "I know that too. I'm not in a place where I can give you anything right now." She said it plainly. "I need you to understand that." "I understand that," he said. "I'm not asking you to." She looked at him for a long moment. The amber light of the emergency fixtures was doing something complicated to the space between them, making it feel smaller than it was, or maybe just more honest. She didn't plan what happened next. That was the true version of it. She was angry and exhausted, and her hands were still slightly unsteady, and he was standing in front of her saying honest things, in a room that smelled like old concrete and rain, and the accumulated weight of 11 years of careful distance came apart in one unguarded moment, and she crossed the 3 feet between them and kissed him. It wasn't soft. It wasn't the kind of kiss that happens in careful movies between people who have figured everything out. It was messy and urgent and tasted like late coffee and the specific desperation of something being released after a very long compression. His hands came up and he was holding her like he was afraid she'd disappear again, and she was gripping the front of his jacket like she was afraid she'd come to her senses and she didn't want to yet. She came to her senses. She stepped back. Her hands dropped. The air between them was different, charged and uncertain and slightly too real. Ethan didn't move toward her. He stood where she'd left him, breathing slightly harder than normal, looking at her with an expression she had no precedent for. Not triumphant, not relieved, just fully present in the way that people are when something has happened that actually matters. "Lena, don't," she said. "I wasn't going to say anything. I know what you were going to say." She turned away, put her hand to her mouth briefly, then dropped it. "I know exactly what you were going to say, and I can't hear it right now." "Okay. I need to go." "Okay." "This doesn't—" She stopped, started again. "This doesn't mean I've decided anything. I need you to know that." "I know," he said, and then, very quietly, "But you're still here." She was. She was still standing in the room, facing the high windows and the rain, and her feet were not moving toward the door. That was the problem with this. That had been the problem with this from the beginning. She kept finding herself still in the room. "I'm going home," she said. She made her feet move this time. She walked to the door. She opened it. The hallway outside was lit normally, fluorescent and ordinary, the rest of the hotel going on without any awareness of what had just happened in the storage room. She stopped in the doorway. "I never forgot you either," she said. She didn't turn around. "I spent a long time trying to. I want you to know it didn't work." She walked to the elevator. She pressed the button. The doors opened and she got in, and she descended 14 floors to the lobby and walked through the warm amber light of the space she'd helped design and out into the rain without stopping for her umbrella. She was 2 blocks away, rain soaking through her jacket, before she stopped walking and stood on the sidewalk and let herself feel the full weight of what had just happened. The anger was still there. She wanted to be clear about that, even to herself, especially to herself. The anger was real and old, and it belonged to her, and she wasn't going to pretend it had dissolved in a conversation in a storage room. He'd hurt her. He'd stood in front of a room full of people and named her as not enough, and she'd been 17 and she'd believed it for longer than she should have. That was real. That had happened. The fact that he'd been afraid, that his father had been a controlling and damaging force, that he'd spent years regretting it. None of that unmade what had been made. But the other thing was also real. The kiss, and the 11 years of trying not to need it, and the fact that even now, standing in the rain 2 blocks from the hotel, what she felt most was not anger and not relief and not the clean clarity of resolution. What she felt, standing in the rain, was terrified. Specifically, purely terrified. The way you're terrified when something you decided was gone turns out to have been present the entire time. She pulled out her phone. She stood under the overhang of a closed pharmacy and called her mother. Her mother picked up on the second ring, which meant she'd been awake. "Lena?" Her mother's voice slightly rough, immediately alert. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong," Lena said. She stopped. "Do you remember that summer, when I was 17? The theater?" Silence. Then, carefully. "Yes." "Did you know? When we moved, did you know it was partly because of him? Because you wanted to get me away from—" "Yes," her mother said. No hesitation. Lena leaned against the pharmacy wall. The rain came down. "Why didn't you tell me?" she said. "Because you just had your heart broken and you were 17 and telling you would have given him too much space in the story." Her mother paused. "I wanted you to move forward, not spend years asking why." Lena laughed, a short, slightly broken sound. "I spent years asking why, anyway." "I know, baby." Her mother's voice was soft in the way it only got late at night. "I know you did." "He's the man from the dinner," Lena said. "The setup. Ethan Calloway. He's the same person." Her mother was quiet for 3 full seconds. "I know," she said. This time, Lena's voice did come apart, slightly. "You knew?" "Margaret, his mother. She called me. She told me who her son was. She told me she thought—" Her mother stopped. "She thought maybe it was time. She said he'd been carrying it too." "You could have told me," Lena said. The words came out less angry than she'd have expected, mostly just tired. "You wouldn't have gone," her mother said simply. She wasn't wrong. Lena stood in the rain for another few seconds. "I kissed him," she said. "Oh," her mother said. "And then I left." A pause. Then, "That sounds about right." Lena made the sound that was almost a laugh again. "I don't know what I'm doing." "Neither does anyone," her mother said. "That's not as unusual as you think." The rain was letting up, the way rain in Los Angeles usually does. Not gradually, but suddenly, like someone had turned a dial. The street was wet and orange-lit and quiet, and Lena stood there with her phone pressed to her ear and her jacket soaked through, and thought about a storage room and a high window, and a man who had said, "I ruined the only real thing I ever had," in a voice that didn't sound like performance. "Go home," her mother said. "Get dry. Eat something." "I'm fine." "You're standing in the rain." "How do you know that?" "Because you always used to stand in the rain when something happened," her mother said. "You did it at 8 years old, and you did it at 17, and apparently you still do it." Lena looked up at the clearing sky. "I'll call you tomorrow." "I'll be here." She put the phone in her wet pocket and started walking to her car. The city around her was doing its usual thing, moving and lit and indifferent, and somehow, tonight, not as isolating as usual. She drove home. She took a hot shower. She ate toast because her mother had told her to eat something, and toast was what she had. She sat on her couch in her old sweatpants, the same gray ones with the bleach stain, the ones she'd worn to Aurelius weeks ago, intending to destroy an evening that had instead turned into this. And she let herself think about everything without trying to organize it or manage it. The anger, the kiss, the way his voice had broken on her name in that warehouse, the way Sophie had held her hand at the farmer's market, the empty chair in the penthouse photograph, angled toward the view, carrying the evidence of someone who had just stepped out of the frame. She didn't make any decisions that night. She was done making decisions under the weight of old hurt. She'd made enough of those in 11 years, and they'd kept her safe and solitary in equal measure. But she stopped, for the first time since she'd looked up across a candlelit restaurant in Aurelius and seen a ghost made flesh. She stopped trying to decide what she felt. She just felt it, all of it, the whole complicated, exhausting, terrifying weight of it. And strangely, sitting on her couch at midnight with cold toast on the coffee table and wet hair drying slowly, that was the most honest she'd been with herself in 11 years. She didn't hear from him for 4 days. That was the first thing, the silence. She'd expected something, though she couldn't have said exactly what. A text, maybe. An email routed through the professional channel that was also something else underneath, something that would force her to respond or not respond, to make a decision she hadn't made yet. Instead, there was nothing, and the nothing was its own kind of pressure, sitting in the corner of every day like a piece of furniture she kept walking around. The campaign was in its final production phase. There were emails from Becca about print timelines and digital delivery formats, and one lengthy thread about a font licensing issue that Lena managed on autopilot, her professional brain running the familiar tracks while the rest of her sat quietly with the events of Thursday night and did nothing useful with them. She worked. She slept badly. She ate toast more than was probably nutritionally advisable. She called her mother twice and talked about other things. On the fourth day, Sunday, her phone buzzed with a text from an unsaved number that she recognized immediately. I'm not going to pretend Thursday didn't happen, but I also don't want to push. When you're ready to talk, I'm here. No timeline. She read it 3 times. Then she set her phone face down on the kitchen table and made coffee and stood at her window looking at the Silver Lake neighborhood doing its Sunday morning thing. A man walking a dog, 2 kids on bikes, someone's sprinkler coming on at the wrong time and hitting the sidewalk. She picked up her phone. I'm not ready yet, she typed, then deleted it. Give me a few more days, she typed, then deleted that too. She typed, okay, sent it before she could complicate it. His response came back in under a minute. Okay, just that. No pressure, no follow-up question, no elaboration. She put her phone down and drank her coffee and acknowledged quietly and without any pleasure that a man who responds to okay with okay and means it is considerably more dangerous to her equilibrium than a man who pushes. The few more days turned into a week. Not avoidance exactly, more like the time it takes to let something settle before you can see what shape it's actually in. She finished the campaign deliverables on Tuesday and sent the final package to Becca, who forwarded it to the client team. And on Wednesday morning, she got an email from Diane, Ethan's assistant, with the subject line Campaign Final Review. Thursday 2 p.m. and a conference room booking at the Sunset flagship. Professional. Completely professional. Just the job, just the work, just the normal end-of-project review that always happened. She confirmed the meeting. Thursday came. She wore actual clothes. Not the black dress her mother had chosen and not the sweatpants of her original plan, but her own things. Dark jeans, a good jacket, boots that had taken 3 years to break in properly. She looked like herself. That felt important. The conference room had the full campaign laid out. Print boards, digital mock-ups, the video edits on a loop on the screen at the end of the table. Becca was there, and 2 people from the Callaway marketing team, and Diane. Ethan came in 2 minutes after Lena, which meant he'd timed it so she'd be settled before he arrived, and she noticed that even if she didn't acknowledge it. He looked at her when he came in. One look, direct and brief. The kind that is checking in rather than asking anything. She gave him a small nod. He sat down. The review took 90 minutes. It was entirely professional and entirely good. The marketing team had strong responses to the work. There were 2 minor revision requests that were genuinely minor, and the overall direction was confirmed. Lena presented the concept rationale clearly and answered questions without over-explaining, which was always how she knew a project had been built on something solid. When it was over and the room was clearing, she was packing up her boards when she heard the others leave and realized Ethan had stayed. Good work, he said, plain, direct. Thank you. She kept moving. Lena? She stopped, straightened up, looked at him. He was across the table from her, not close, his jacket off, and his sleeves rolled the way they always were by afternoon. He looked like someone who had been waiting a week to say something and had spent that week deciding whether the thing was worth saying. Sophie has a school thing on Saturday, he said. It's a market. The kids sell things they made. She made about 40 paper animals, and she's very serious about the sales potential. He paused. She asked if you were coming. Lena looked at him. I didn't tell her to ask, he said quickly. I didn't suggest it. She asks about you, regularly, with a frequency that I find both endearing and slightly complicated. Despite everything, despite the entire accumulated weight of the past several weeks, Lena felt the corner of her mouth move. How many paper animals? At last count, 43. She's added 3 since the weekend. There's a whole giraffe situation. A giraffe situation. She's very proud of the neck. The neck took a long time. Something moved in his expression. The specific, helpless warmth of a parent describing a child's work and being unable to fully suppress how much they love it. Lena set her last board down. What time on Saturday? 10, he said. It's at her school. East Side Elementary on Rowena. You don't have to. I told her I'd ask and that you were busy, so there's no... I'll be there at 10, she said. The silence that followed was the softer kind, the kind that has something in it rather than around it. Okay, he said. Okay, she said. She picked up her boards and her bag and left the room. In the hallway, she exhaled slowly and walked to the elevator and thought, "You are making choices now. Make them clearly." The school market on Saturday was held in the gymnasium and spilled out into the parking lot, and it smelled like a combination of construction paper and baked goods and the specific organized chaos of 30-something small children who had each decided their product was the most important product at the market. Sophie's table was near the back of the gym, covered in a hand-decorated tablecloth that appeared to have been made with stamps. A repeating pattern of elephants and stars that Lena recognized as the work of someone who had taken the presentation very seriously. The paper animals were arranged by species, each one with a small handwritten price tag. Gerald sat at the corner of the table in an official-looking position that suggested he was either security or a business partner. Sophie saw Lena before Lena reached the table and did the full-body reaction of a 6-year-old who has been hoping for something and had it arrive. Arms wide, immediate movement forward. She stopped just short of Lena in a way that suggested someone had recently had a conversation with her about not barreling into people. "You came," she said, with the gravity of a person confirming an important appointment. "I came," Lena said, crouching down to her level. "I heard there was a giraffe situation." Sophie's face became entirely serious. The neck was very hard. She turned back to the table and pointed to a paper giraffe in the back row, neck slightly listing to the left, but absolutely committed to its height. "It kept falling over. I used extra tape." "The extra tape was the right call," Lena said. "That's what I said," Sophie said, with the satisfaction of someone who has been vindicated. Ethan was standing at the side of the table with a coffee cup that appeared to be from a nearby stand, wearing jeans and a soft gray sweater, which was the most casually she'd ever seen him dressed, and which she processed and then deliberately set aside. He looked at her with an expression that was carefully not too much of anything. She gave him a nod that was also carefully calibrated. "The giraffe is $2.50, Sophie told her. "But I'll do $2 because you came. I'll pay the full $2.50, Lena said seriously. Sophie considered this. "Okay," she said, "but you can have the elephant too. That one's $1, but I'm giving it to you free because Gerald likes you." Lena looked at Gerald in his corner. "I'm honored by Gerald's endorsement." "He doesn't like everyone," Sophie said. This appeared to be a true statement, delivered without irony. She spent an hour at the market. She bought the giraffe and the elephant and a small paper crane that Sophie had made from gold paper and presented as a special item not for general sale. She met Sophie's teacher, a tired and warm woman named Ms. Delgado, who said Sophie talked about the color campaign frequently and with great authority. She ate half a baked good from the 4th grade table that turned out to be a very ambitious lemon bar. Ethan stayed mostly at the edge of things, present but not inserting himself, which she appreciated more than she could comfortably say. He was good at that, at being in a space without demanding that the space organize itself around him. It was probably the opposite of how he'd been raised. When Sophie's inventory was dramatically reduced and she was deep in negotiation with another child about a potential trade involving a paper dog, Ethan moved to stand beside Lena at the side of the room. "She sold 31 animals," he said. "She's going to be terrifying in business," Lena said. "I think about that," he said. "What she'll be like at 20, whether I'll have done enough right to counteract everything I'll inevitably do wrong." Lena looked at Sophie, who was now gesturing with some authority at the paper dog in question. "You'll have done enough," she said. "You can't know that." "No," she agreed. "But watching you with her for the last 2 months, you're paying attention. Most of the damage parents do comes from not paying attention. You're paying attention." He was quiet for a moment. "Coming from you, that means something," he said. "You don't say things you don't mean." "I really don't." They stood there in the gymnasium, which smelled like construction paper and coffee and the specific human warmth of a lot of small people being proud of themselves in one space. And Lena thought, this is what ordinary looks like. This is what it feels like when nothing is being performed. She'd forgotten what that felt like with another person. She hadn't realized she'd forgotten until she felt it. "Can we walk?" she said. "After this? Is Sophie?" "She's going home with my neighbor's family after the market. It's already arranged. He glanced at her carefully. Yes, we can walk. They walked through the neighborhood around the school, the kind of quiet residential streets that exist in Los Angeles, like small arguments against the city's reputation. All old trees and uneven sidewalks and houses with personalities. The afternoon was cool, one of those November LA days that feels like fall, the way the city occasionally remembers it's supposed to. Lena walked with her hands in her jacket pockets. He walked beside her without crowding the space. I've been thinking, she said, about what you said. In the warehouse, that you looked for me. I did. I want to believe that, she said. I do believe it, actually. The believing isn't the problem. She stopped walking, turned slightly. The problem is that believing it doesn't automatically change what the other thing did. Both things are true at the same time. He looked for me and he also stood there and said what he said, and I can't just pick one to be the real one. Ethan stopped. He wasn't looking away. You shouldn't have to pick, he said. I did both things. They're both mine. You don't have to resolve them into a version that's easier to hold. She looked at him. Most people want to be forgiven. I want to be understood, he said. That's different. Forgiveness is something you give someone. Understanding is something that's true regardless of what either of us decides. He paused. I'm not asking you to forgive me. I'm asking you to let me be someone different than who I was at 18 because I am. And I know I can't just state that and have it be true for you. I know I have to show it. I know that takes time. And I know it has to be your timeline, not mine. Lena started walking again. He fell back into step. My mother told me she knew, Lena said, about who you were. From the beginning. Your mother called her. I know. My mother told me what she'd done about 2 weeks after the dinner at Aurelius. I had feelings about it. He said feelings with the particular careful weight of someone describing something they've processed but haven't fully neutralized. You were angry. I was complicated, he said. She didn't tell me she was going to do it, but I also... He exhaled. I'd been asking her for years if she knew where your mother had gone. She'd always said no, and then this. He looked sideways. I think she was trying to do something right. I don't think she went about it the right way. But the impulse was... He stopped. She has a lot of her own accounting to do with what happened, what my father built and what she let him build. Lena thought about Margaret Calloway, a woman she'd barely known, a presence at the edge of that terrible October evening. She thought about a mother carrying something for years and deciding to try to set it down in whatever way was available to her. I'm not angry at her, Lena said. I should probably be, but I'm not. She'd be relieved to know that. They turned a corner and the street opened up slightly. A small pocket park between two residential blocks. Just a few benches and an old oak that had been there long enough to have opinions about the neighborhood. Lena sat on one of the benches because her feet were tired and because it felt like a place where you could say something real. He sat beside her, enough space between them to be respectful, not enough to be avoidant. Tell me something about your wife, Lena said. He didn't tense. She'd been watching for it. Why? He said. Because she's part of who you are now, and I don't know anything about her, and that feels like an absence in the conversation. He thought for a moment. Her name was Claire. She was a landscape architect. She had very strong opinions about drought-resistant plants, and she could be cold about anything practical and completely undone by specific pieces of music. She was a good mother in the ways she had time to be, which wasn't enough time. He paused. She and I were good at certain things together and bad at others. I don't want to make her a saint because she wasn't. She was complicated and real and sometimes difficult, and I miss her in the specific way of missing someone who was genuinely a specific person, not a symbol. Lena nodded. Sophia has her eyes, he said. Brown, not mine. Every time I look at Sophie, I see them, and it's... He stopped. You stop expecting it, and then there it is. I know, Lena said, though she hadn't known the specific thing he was describing. She knew the shape of it. They sat in the small park while the afternoon did its quiet work around them. A pigeon landed nearby, looked at them with its minimal level of concern, and departed. I need to say something to you, Ethan said eventually. And I need you to hear it as information rather than pressure, because it's not pressure. It's just something that's true that I think you should have. She looked at him. I haven't looked at anyone the way I look at you in a very long time, he said. Possibly ever, in the full sense of it. I know the timing is terrible and the history is terrible, and I have no right to feel what I feel given everything I did. I know all of that. But you asked me once in a conference room what I actually wanted, and I gave you the careful version. The full version is this. He held her gaze. I stopped being happy the night I lost you. I've had good things since. Sophie, what I built, moments that mattered. But the thing that was possible with you is not a thing I've found anywhere else, and I spent a long time pretending that was just how it was. He paused. That's all. That's the information. Lena looked at the old oak tree. Its roots had pushed up the pavement around the base into a small geography of cracks and angles, which the city had apparently decided to leave rather than fight. That's a large piece of information, she said. I know. I can't say the equivalent back, she said. I'm not in that place yet. I know that too. It would be a lie. I don't want the lie, he said. I've had enough of those. She turned and looked at him, at the specific face she'd been trying to forget for 11 years and had done a partial and imperfect job of. The lines near his eyes that hadn't been there before. The weight behind them that hadn't been there at 18. The way he sat on a park bench, not performing anything, not managing anything, just sitting there being exactly the complicated, flawed, tired, trying person he currently was. I need to go slow, she said. Something in his face changed. Not relief exactly, something quieter and more lasting. As slow as you need, he said. I mean, actually slow, she said. Not, I'll feel differently next week slow. I mean, I have 11 years of being alone in a specific way. I've built a life in that shape. I don't know how to just open a door in it without the whole structure shifting. I know, he said. I'm not asking you to open a door. I'm asking if I can sit on the step outside it for a while. She looked at him for a moment. Then she said, Don't push. I won't. If you push, I'll go backward faster than I came forward. I know. And I need... She stopped, started again. I need you to understand that the work matters to me independently of whatever this is. The campaign, the creative, that's mine. I need that to stay mine. It was always yours, he said. None of that changes. She looked at her hands in her lap. The paper giraffe from Sophie was in her bag, carefully wrapped. She'd carry it home and put it somewhere it wouldn't get damaged, and she understood that fact about herself without needing to analyze it. Okay, she said. Okay, he said. The weeks that followed were the strangest and most disorienting of Lena Carter's adult life, and she was including in that calculation the year she'd worked on a horror production that shot entirely at night, and she'd lost track of the sun for 4 months. The strangeness wasn't dramatic. That was the thing she hadn't been prepared for. She'd expected the process of letting someone back in to feel large and defined, a series of clear before and afters. Instead, it happened in ordinary moments that only became visible when she looked back at them. Coffee at a small place on Hillhurst that he'd found because it reminded him of the Aurelius coffee, but without the intimidating lobby, which she took as a gesture she didn't verbally acknowledge but didn't pretend not to notice either. A Tuesday when Sophie's sitter called out sick and Ethan had 4 hours of meetings he couldn't move and Lena was working from home and she'd said, without premeditation, I can take her for the afternoon, and then spent 4 hours helping Sophie construct an elaborately imagined town from cardboard boxes and making sandwiches in Lena's tiny Silver Lake kitchen and letting Sophie reorganize her bookshelf by color, which was objectively incorrect but which Sophie executed with such satisfaction that Lena left it for 2 weeks before quietly fixing it. There was a Sunday afternoon when he showed up at her building with a paper bag of things from the farmer's market. The good tomatoes she'd been buying, a jar of the honey she'd tried and not bought because it was expensive, a sourdough from the stand run by the man who Sophie called the bread guy, and left it with her downstairs neighbor because she wasn't home and hadn't answered her phone, no note except his name on the bag. She came home at 7 p.m. and found it sitting outside her door and stood in the hallway with it for a full minute before going inside. She didn't say anything about it. He didn't bring it up. But the next time they were in the same room, there was something different in the air, something slightly warmer than before, and she let it be there without naming it. The nights were the hardest part, not in the way she'd expected, The hard part wasn't longing, or not only that. The hard part was fear. Specifically, the fear of someone who had learned the exact shape and dimension of what it costs to trust someone and be wrong, and who now lay awake at 2 a.m. doing the arithmetic on whether the potential of being right this time was worth the known price of being wrong. She talked to her friend Jules about it once, because Jules had known her for 8 years and had watched her date exactly 2 people in that time and knew the terrain. "You're describing someone who's showing up," Jules said. They were on Lena's couch with wine, which was the furniture and lubricant required for this type of conversation. "Like actually showing up, not performing it." "I know," Lena said. "And your brain is treating that as suspicious." "My brain is not wrong to treat it as something to examine carefully." "There's a difference between examining carefully and refusing to let anything pass the examination," Jules said. "You know that." Lena looked at her wine glass. "He hurt me very specifically," she said. "It wasn't just a breakup. It was—" "I know what it was," Jules said, not unkindly. "You told me. Years ago, when you finally told me." She paused. "But you also kissed him in a warehouse, which I'm still processing, and then you told him you need to go slow, and he said okay, and he's been— What you're describing sounds like okay." "Yes," Lena said. "So what are you waiting for?" Jules said. Lena thought about it. "I'm waiting to stop waiting for it to go wrong," she said finally. Jules looked at her. "That's going to take however long it takes," she said. "You can't shortcut that, but you also can't let the waiting become the permanent condition." She drove home from Jules's apartment thinking about that. The waiting as the permanent condition. She'd done that, hadn't she? She'd built a whole life with the waiting built into its architecture. The space she left for things to go wrong, the doors she kept from fully opening, the parts of herself she kept on the shelf in case she needed them later. The following Saturday she called him. Not a text. An actual call, which felt more deliberate and therefore more like a decision. He picked up on the second ring. "Hey. Hey." She was sitting in her car in her own parking spot because she'd called him before getting out of the car, which was a choice she'd made to stop herself from backing out of making the call. "I was thinking about the weekend. If you mentioned Sophie had a thing at the park on Sunday. If you need someone to—" "Yes," he said, before she'd finished the sentence. "I haven't said what I was going to offer," she said. "I know, but yes." She exhaled. "You don't push, but you answer fast." "Those are different things," he said, and she could hear the smile in it. "Answering fast isn't pushing. It's just not pretending I don't want the thing I want." She sat in her car with the phone to her ear and the quiet Sunday afternoon around her and thought, this is what it feels like to make a choice instead of making an avoidance. "Sunday," she said. "The park. What time?" 11. "Sophie has a very specific plan involving the duck pond, and she's been waiting for an audience. I'll be there at 11. She hung up. She sat for another 30 seconds. Then she got out of the car and went inside and didn't lie awake that night in the way she'd been lying awake. And that was small, but it was something. The campaign launched the first week of November, across digital platforms and print and a billboard on Sunset that she passed every morning on her way to a new project. It looked like what she'd wanted it to look like. Alive, warm, honest. The amber tones carried something she could feel even at driving speed. The unmade bed with the open book, Sophie's hands with Gerald. The empty chair angled toward the city. Becca sent her a screenshot of the engagement numbers on the first day, and they were strong. Strong enough that 2 other brands had called the production company asking to talk. Lena read the numbers and felt the particular satisfaction of work that had done what you hoped it would do, and then sent the email to the team and went back to what she was doing. Ethan texted at some point that afternoon. "It's everything you said it could be. I hope you know that." She read it twice. Then she typed, "I know. You gave it room to be." His response, "That's what you do with good work. You give it room." She put the phone in her pocket and went back to the new project, and there was something different in the afternoon. Lighter, maybe. Less weight in the place where weight had been living for 11 years. Not gone. She wasn't going to pretend it was gone, but lighter. And lightness, when you've been carrying something long enough, is its own remarkable thing. That evening, she stopped at the billboard on her way home, pulled over on Sunset in the 10-second gap between cars where you can briefly stop if you're committed to it, and looked at it. The amber and the warmth and the evidence of the interrupted moment scaled to 20 feet and lit against the early dark. She'd made that. Out of old hurt and new morning light and 43 paper animals and coffee at 9:30, and a man sitting in a chair in her office being exactly as complicated and real as she was. She pulled back into traffic and drove home. She had a voicemail from her mother when she got there. She listened to it while she changed her shoes. Her mother's voice, warm and slightly tentative in the way it got when she wanted to ask something without seeming like she was asking. I heard the campaign launched. I saw it online. Lena, it's beautiful. You should be proud. A pause. Call me when you have a minute. I want to hear your voice. That's all. Lena sat on the edge of her bed with her phone in her hand. Through the window, the Silver Lake evening was doing its particular thing. The orange-gold light on the hills. The sound of the neighborhood settling into itself. Someone cooking something that smelled like garlic and something good. She called her mother back. Her mother picked up immediately, which she always did when Lena called, which was something Lena was going to stop taking for granted. It launched, Lena said. It's gorgeous, her mother said. The colors. Lena. I know. How are you? Her mother said it with the weight that meant actually not just okay. Lena thought about Sunday at the park, and Sophie's duck pond plan, and the choice she'd made in the parking lot rather than the avoidance. She thought about lightness, and what 11 years of weight felt like when it shifted incrementally, millimeter by millimeter, towards something that might become possible. I'm getting there, she said. Her mother was quiet for a moment. Then, that's enough, baby. Getting there is enough. Lena looked out the window at the amber evening and thought that maybe, for now, it was. Getting there, it turned out, looked different than she'd expected. She'd imagined in the abstract, unexamined way you imagine things you're not sure you actually want, that if she ever let herself move towards something with Ethan Calloway, there would be a clear moment, a defined threshold, something she could point to and say, before this and after this. That was how her brain had always organized things, in clean architectural lines before and after, inside and outside, safe and not safe. Instead, it happened the way the light changes in the amber palette she'd built for the campaign, so gradually that you only noticed it had changed when you looked away and then looked back. November moved into December. The new project Lena had taken, a limited series for a streaming platform, period drama, 1970s Los Angeles, kept her busy in the particular consuming way of good work. She was sourcing and pulling and building looks for 11 recurring characters, which meant her Silver Lake apartment had fabric swatches taped to every available wall and a rolling rack blocking the closet door and reference images pinned above her desk in overlapping layers that only made sense to her. Ethan saw the apartment in that state for the first time on a Wednesday evening when he came to pick up Sophie, who had spent the afternoon there while her regular after-school sitter dealt with a family thing, and he stood in the doorway of Lena's living room and looked at the organized chaos of her working space with an expression she recognized as genuine interest. "This is how you think," he said. It wasn't a question. "This is how I think," she confirmed, not looking up from the 2 fabric samples she was comparing under the lamp. "It looks like someone's mind made visible." "That's exactly what it is." She held both samples up. "Which one reads more like 1974 to you?" "Not literally. Emotionally." He came closer, which she'd stopped tracking as a notable event somewhere around the 4th Sunday at the park. He looked at both samples seriously. "That one," he said, pointing to the left. "The other one is trying too hard." She looked at the sample. He was right. She put the other one back in the discard pile and didn't comment on the accuracy, but he'd been in enough creative conversations with her to know what the silence meant. Sophie appeared from the kitchen, where she'd been finishing a snack, still holding a cracker. She looked at the fabric samples and said, "That one's better," pointing at the same one Ethan had pointed to. "You two are unnervingly aligned," Lena said. "Gerald agrees too," Sophie said, nodding at the stuffed elephant, which was sitting on Lena's couch, with the settled comfort of a guest who has been here before and knows where things are, which he had. Which he did. Lena looked at Gerald on her couch and thought, at some point this became ordinary, and I didn't fight it hard enough, and now I'm not sure I want to. The thing about ordinary was that she'd spent so long treating it as something other people had, not her, specifically, not the version of herself that had been shaped by the October night and the Fairfax apartment and 11 years of making do and making something, that when it appeared in her own living room in the form of a 6-year-old and a stuffed elephant and a man pointing at fabric samples with actual consideration, she almost didn't recognize it. Almost. The complication arrived on a Friday, the way complications usually do, without announcement, disguised as something routine. Lena was at the Callaway Collection flagship for a follow-up meeting about a secondary campaign that had spun off from the first one's success, and she was waiting for the elevator when she heard her name spoken behind her in a voice she didn't immediately recognize. She turned. A man she'd never seen before, 60, expensive suit, silver hair worn with the confidence of someone who considered it an asset, was looking at her from across the lobby with an expression that was simultaneously curious and assessing and several other things she couldn't read fast enough. "You're Lena Carter," he said. Not a question. The creative lead on the campaign. "Yes." She kept her voice neutral. "Can I help you?" He crossed the lobby toward her. His walk was the walk of a man who had never in his adult life needed to move out of anyone's way. "Richard Callaway," he said. The elevator arrived. She didn't get on it. She'd known, in the abstract, that Ethan's father existed, the man who had stood in the doorway of his son's life and said this girl doesn't belong here, who had built an empire on the architecture of exclusion and called it protecting the family, who had taken an 18-year-old boy who was afraid and used that fear like a handle. He was standing in front of her now in his expensive suit, looking entirely comfortable, which she found briefly breathtaking in its audacity. "The campaign work is impressive," he said. "Ethan has an eye for talent." A small pause. "Or perhaps other things." Lena looked at him. She was aware of her heartbeat in a way that she recognized as the body's response to threat, and she made a deliberate choice to let it do its thing while she did hers. "Thank you," she said, because the work comment was accurate and she wasn't going to decline a true statement. "I've heard your name in some contexts outside the professional," he said. His tone was pleasant, which was somehow worse than if it hadn't been. "I understand you and Ethan have some history." "That's between Ethan and me," she said. "Of course." He tilted his head slightly. "I just want to say, and I say this with no particular agenda, that my son is in a complicated position. He carries a great deal of responsibility, the family name, the business interests, the child. People who enter his life need to understand that responsibility." He smiled, and the smile was professionally calibrated. "I'm sure you do." Lena held his gaze for a moment. Something was happening in her chest, not quite fear, not quite anger, more the specific feeling of recognizing an old pattern in a new room. "Mr. Callaway," she said, keeping her voice at the same pleasant register his was at, "I grew up with nothing, not as a character-building exercise, but actually, materially, with nothing. I spent my 20s building something from that nothing because that's what you do when there's no other option. I'm very good at my work. I don't need your son's name to be successful, and I have no agenda beyond what's already visible." She paused. "So if what you're doing right now is what I think you're doing, I'd like you to know that it's not going to land the way you're hoping." Something moved in his face. Surprise, maybe. Or reassessment. "I'm not sure what you think," he started. "I think you came down here because you heard I was in the building," she said. "I think you wanted to see what you were dealing with. And I think you've made this kind of approach before, to someone who was younger and less certain than I am. And it worked then." She picked up her bag. "It won't work now. I hope your afternoon is good." She got on the next elevator. Her hands were steady. She noted that with something close to pride. She called Ethan from the 4th floor. He picked up in 2 rings. "Your father is in the lobby," she said. A beat of silence, then, "Lena's." "I'm fine," she said. "He introduced himself and said some things, and I said some things back, and it was fine. I'm not calling because I need rescuing." She paused. "I'm calling because I think you should know he's here, and I think we should talk. Not right now, but soon." Another beat. His voice, when it came back, was quiet and controlled in the way she recognized as someone managing something they're genuinely angry about. "I'll come up." "Finish what you're doing," she said. "I have a meeting. We'll talk after." "Lena." "I'm genuinely fine," she said. "He's not 18 years ago, and neither am I." She meant it. That was the thing she held on to for the rest of the afternoon. She meant it. Richard Calloway in the lobby had felt like a test she hadn't known she was taking, and she had not only passed it, but passed it without performing anything. She'd just said what was true and stood where she was standing, and that had been sufficient. The meeting with Ethan happened at 6:30. After the building had cleared and the day staff had largely gone home, and the Sunset flagship had the particular late evening quality it got, warm and quiet and lit from everywhere and visible. He came to the small creative space which had become, over the preceding weeks, the room where they talked about things that mattered. He looked tired in a way that was specific. The tired of someone who has been bracing for a thing and had the thing arrive. "Tell me what he said," Ethan said. She told him, plainly and without editorializing. He listened. She could see him getting very controlled in the way he did when he was angry. Not cold, exactly, but compressed, like someone turning down a dial deliberately. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then, "I'm sorry." "You don't have to apologize for him. He's my father," Ethan said. "I can't fully separate those things. What he does in this building, in my name, with my people," he stopped. "I told him 6 months ago that his role in the company was changing. I've been moving him out of day-to-day influence for over a year. He still walks in here like he owns it because he built the original version of it, and he hasn't fully accepted that I own what it became." Lena looked at him. "Is that a business problem or a personal one?" "Both," he said. "And I've been handling it like it's primarily a business problem when it's primarily a personal one." He sat down, put his elbows on the table, and pressed his hands against his face for a moment. A gesture she'd never seen from him, entirely unguarded, entirely tired. Then he dropped his hands and looked at her. "He's the reason I did what I did. When I was 18. He's the reason I stood there and said those words. And I've spent my adult life building something he can't control anymore. And I still let him walk into this building and talk to you like you need to be evaluated. He talked to me like he was reminding me of my place," she said. Which I don't have," she said. "A place in his system. I exist entirely outside whatever hierarchy he's built. And I know that now in a way I didn't when I was 17, which is why it didn't work." Ethan looked at her steadily. "When I was 18 and he told me to end it, I was terrified of losing everything he controlled. The money, the future, the name. And I told myself that was a reasonable fear. I told myself the reasonable fear justified what I did." His voice was even, but there was something underneath it, something that had been there for a long time and was finally finding words. It didn't. There is no version where that was justified. I made a choice based on fear, and I called the fear practicality. And someone I loved paid the full price of that while I kept everything that was supposed to make the price worth paying. Lena held the words in the room for a moment. Someone I loved. Not past tense in the way of something finished. "I'm cutting his access," Ethan said. "Not because of today specifically. I should have done it a year ago, and I kept finding reasons not to, which were really just one reason. He's my father, and I don't know what that means when the father is someone who shaped you badly." He paused. "But I know what happens when I let him keep access to things that matter to me. I know the cost." He looked at her directly. "I'm not going to let him anywhere near you again. Not because you can't handle it. Clearly, you can handle it. But because you shouldn't have to. No one should." Something loosened in Lena's chest. Not dramatically. Just a small giving way. The way a knot loosens when exactly the right amount of tension is released from exactly the right place. "Okay," she said. "Okay?" "Okay," she said again. She looked at the board still on the wall from the secondary campaign meeting, the amber and the warmth and the lived-in evidence of real life. "I need to say something too." He waited. "I've been so careful," she said, "for so long. Careful about what I let in, careful about what I showed people, careful about everything. And I told myself that was wisdom, learning from what happened." She looked at her hands on the table. "But at some point, wisdom becomes just fear with better vocabulary, and I don't want to do that anymore." She raised her eyes. "I don't know what we are exactly. I can't fully name it yet. But I know I don't want to keep one foot out the door, because I'm waiting for the thing that went wrong before to go wrong again." "Yishi in situ." Ethan was very still. I'm not saying I'm not scared, she said. I'm saying I'd rather be scared and in the room than safe and outside it. He looked at her with an expression that had everything in it and was making no attempt to hide any of it. That's enough, he said quietly. Lena, that is completely enough. She almost said something else, something careful, something that qualified or hedged what she'd just said. The habit was strong. She let it pass. Tell me something, she said instead. Anything. When Sophie talks about me, she said. What does she say? He smiled. It was the realest smile she'd seen from him. Not the controlled version, not the one he wore in meetings or in public spaces, but the one that started in his eyes and moved to the rest of his face without stopping to check whether it was appropriate. She says you understand things, he said. She told her teacher that you're the color lady and that you know what things feel like on the inside. Lena looked at the wall. She's not wrong, he said. No, she agreed. She's really not. Winter in Los Angeles doesn't arrive the way winter arrives in other places. It doesn't announce itself with the definitive cold of northern cities or the dramatic spectacle of snow. It comes in quietly, slightly lower light in the afternoon, a chill after dark that surprises you each time. The mountains visible and snow-capped from the freeway, which always felt to Lena like a secret the city was keeping. December arrived in this way, and with it the particular rhythms of the season that she'd spent many years navigating as primarily practical logistics. Her mother's small apartment, which was better than it had been, the gas was on, the debts were moving toward manageable. The pressure had receded from the specific crushing kind to the ordinary kind that everyone carries. The success of the Callaway campaign had brought enough new accounts to the production company that Lena's rate had been renegotiated, not dramatically but meaningfully, and she'd been able to help with some of what her mother was still carrying without making it a transaction. Her mother didn't cry when Lena transferred the money. She just said, "Thank you, baby," in the voice she used when she couldn't say the larger thing, and Lena said, "It's fine, Mom," in the voice she used when she wanted to say the larger thing, but didn't know how to without both of them falling apart. They had dinner together on a Sunday, just the two of them, in her mother's apartment on the east side. Her mother made the chicken dish she'd been making since Lena was small. Not because it was her best cooking, but because it was the one that meant home, that meant you're safe here in the language of food that some families speak fluently. They ate at the small kitchen table and talked about the new project and about a show her mother was watching and about the neighbor downstairs who had gotten a new dog with complicated feelings about mail carriers. At some point her mother said carefully, "How are things with Ethan?" "Good," Lena said. Her mother looked at her with the particular attention of a woman who has watched her daughter manage things alone for a decade. Good like manageable or good like actually good? Lena thought about it. Actually good, she said. Slowly, but actually. Her mother reached across the table and covered Lena's hand with hers briefly. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. The moment that shifted everything, and there was a moment, one specific moment, even though Lena had told herself it would be gradual, happened on a Tuesday evening in the second week of December. Sophie had lost a tooth. This was apparently an event of enormous significance, treated with the gravity it deserved by all parties. Lena was at the penthouse with Ethan going over the preliminary scope of the secondary campaign, when Sophie came running from the bathroom holding a very small tooth in her palm with the triumphant energy of someone who has accomplished something genuinely difficult. "It came out," she announced. "I was brushing, and it just... Look!" Lena leaned over to look at the tooth, which Sophie was presenting at maximum proximity. "That's a big one," Lena said. "It's the front one," Sophie said. "Now I have a hole." She opened her mouth wide to demonstrate the gap with complete unself-consciousness. "Daddy says I'll look like a pirate." "Daddy's not wrong," Lena said. Sophie snapped her mouth closed and turned the tooth over in her palm with the focused attention of a scientist examining a specimen. "I'm going to put it under my pillow," she said. Then she looked up at Lena with an expression of sudden and serious intent. "Will you stay until I'm asleep? I want to make sure it gets done right." The room was quiet. Ethan, from his side of the table, said nothing. He was looking at Sophie with that expression Lena knew, the one that had everything in it. Lena looked at Sophie, the gap where the tooth had been, Gerald under her arm, the small, full-gravity seriousness of a 6-year-old asking for a thing she wanted without understanding that the asking was significant. "Yeah," Lena said. "I'll stay." Sophie nodded, satisfied, and went to get ready for bed with the businesslike efficiency of someone with a plan. Lena and Ethan looked at each other across the table. She couldn't read everything in his face. She wasn't trying to, she just let it be there. Sophie's bedtime routine was elaborate, and she was not apologetic about it. There was the specific order of brushing and washing, and the requirement that Gerald be positioned correctly, and the matter of which blanket went on top, which turned out to be a nightly negotiation with established terms. Lena sat on the edge of the bed while Ethan did the parts he always did, and Sophie gave her the tooth to hold at one point while she arranged her pillow, and Lena sat there with a baby tooth in her palm and felt something she didn't have a word for and didn't need one. When Sophie was finally horizontal and the tooth was ceremonially placed under the pillow and Gerald was positioned at the correct angle, she looked at Lena with heavy eyes and said, "You're warm." "What?" Lena said. "Like warm," Sophie said, already drifting. "Like the colors." She was asleep in 4 minutes. Lena sat on the edge of the bed in the dim light for a moment longer than she needed to, and then she stood carefully and walked out of the room and pulled the door almost but not entirely closed behind her. Ethan was in the main room at the window. The city below was doing what it always did at this hour, spread out gold and orange and continuous in every direction, Los Angeles being enormously, indifferently, beautifully itself. She came to stand beside him, not close enough to be anything she hadn't decided to be. Just beside him, both of them looking at the city. She said, "I'm warm," Lena said. "Like the colors." "She's been saying that for weeks," he said. "I didn't repeat it because I didn't want to make you feel—" He stopped. "Responsible for something," she said. "Yes." She looked at the city. "I don't feel responsible," she said. "I feel—" She paused, looking for the right word and deciding honesty didn't require the right word, only the true one. "I feel like I've been standing outside something warm for a very long time, and I finally walked in." He turned to look at her. She kept looking at the city for another second, because she needed the second, and then she turned to look at him too. "I'm in the room," she said. "I told you I was scared, and in the room. I meant it." He raised his hand slowly, carefully, with the specific deliberateness of someone who knows what slow means to this particular person, and touched her face. Just that, his hand against her jaw, warm and still. "I know," he said. She put her hand over his. Her fingers were cold from the window glass and his were warm, and the contrast was exactly what it was. And she let it be exactly that rather than trying to make it more. She kissed him this time, without urgency. Not the warehouse kiss, which had been years of pressure finding the one unlocked door and pouring through it. This was something different, quiet and decided. The kiss of someone who has made a choice with their eyes open and intends to stand behind it. He kissed her back the same way, like he understood the difference. When they stopped, his forehead was against hers, and the city was still doing its thing outside the window, and neither of them said anything for a moment because neither of them needed to fill the space. Then he said softly, "This time I'm never letting you go." She heard it land. She felt it land. And for once, for the first time in 11 years, she didn't flinch at a promise. She didn't build a contingency around it. She didn't file it in the category of things people say that you should not depend on. She just let it be true. Right now, in this room, with the city below them and Sophie asleep down the hall with a tooth under her pillow and Gerald at the correct angle, she let it be true. "Okay," she said, not as surrender, as choice. The weeks that followed were not perfect because nothing that is real is perfect. There was a difficult phone call between Ethan and his father that Ethan told her about afterward, sitting at her kitchen table with a cup of tea she'd made because he'd looked like he needed something warm to hold. It had not gone cleanly. His father had said things that were the things men like Richard Calloway say when the architecture they've built around their children starts coming apart. Things about responsibility and legacy and what the family was owed. Ethan had said things back that were the things you say when you finally mean them. It had ended without resolution, which was its own kind of resolution. "Are you okay?" she'd asked. "I'm processing," he said. He turned the teacup in his hands. "He's still my father. That's not going to stop being complicated." "No," she agreed. It's not. But I know what I'm choosing, he said. I know what side of that I'm on. He looked at her. I've known for a while. I just needed to say it out loud to him. She reached across the table and put her hand over his, the way her mother had done to her at the small kitchen table, briefly and without requiring words. He turned his hand over under hers and held it. That was the shape of it. Not grand gestures, not the sweep of things in movies where the music tells you how to feel. Just two people at a kitchen table in Silver Lake with tea getting cold, holding on. Her own life was shifting in ways she was still mapping. The new series, the 1970s drama, was getting serious attention. The showrunner had told her, in the blunt way of showrunners who've learned that oblique praise gets misread, that her work on the period looks was the best he'd seen in his career. She'd said thank you without immediately minimizing it, which was new. The show had been picked up for a second season before the first had even aired, and her contract had been expanded and renegotiated with a number attached to it that she'd had to sit with for a full day before it started to feel real. She called Becca and said, I think we should talk about taking on a third production. Becca had said, I've been waiting for you to say that for 2 years. And Lena had laughed and said, I was getting there. And Becca said, you always get there. You just take the long route. She was getting there. That was still the most accurate description of where she was. Not arrived. There was no arrived, she'd decided. There was just moving, and knowing which direction you were moving in, and choosing to keep going. Christmas came to Los Angeles in the way it always did. Without cold, without snow, with string lights and a certain quality of feeling that the city put on like a costume it didn't quite believe in but wore gamely anyway. Sophie had opinions about Christmas that were extensive and hierarchical and non-negotiable, and by mid-December she had briefed Lena thoroughly on all of them, including the important matter of the specific cookies that needed to be made and the non-negotiable requirement that Gerald have a small piece of ribbon tied around his ear for the season. Gerald got his ribbon. Lena tied it on a Thursday afternoon while Sophie supervised. Red, Sophie said. It's red, Lena said. A little to the left. Lena adjusted. Sophie examined. Okay, she said, with the satisfaction of someone whose standards have been met. She looked at Lena. Are you going to be here for Christmas? Lena looked at her. I don't know yet, she said honestly. I'm spending the morning with my mom, but maybe after. Sophie absorbed this. Can your mom come too? She said. We have a lot of food. Lena blinked. She stopped. I'll ask her. Gerald thinks she should, Sophie said. I'll tell her Gerald's position on the matter, Lena said. I'm sure that'll be persuasive. Her mother did come. On Christmas afternoon, she drove across the city to the Callaway penthouse with a container of the cookies she made every year. Imperfect, slightly uneven, exactly right. And Sophie opened the door and immediately assessed the container and said, Are those snickerdoodles? With an urgency that made Lena's mother laugh out loud. They ate dinner at a table that was slightly too small for the number of people and dishes on it, which Ethan appeared to not have fully planned for, and which nobody minded. Her mother talked to Ethan with the directness of a woman who has decided that life is too short for extended social calibration, and Ethan took it without posturing, which Lena watched and filed away as the thing she'd been subconsciously looking for. Sophie fell asleep at the table at 8 p.m., with her face about 4 inches from a half-eaten piece of pie, which required a careful extraction operation that Ethan and Lena performed together in the particular wordless coordination of people who have been in enough rooms together to understand each other's movements. After Sophie was in bed and her mother had said her goodbyes and Ethan had walked her down to the lobby, Lena stood at the penthouse window alone for a few minutes. The city below was strung with light, not the usual orange gold, but something warmer and more deliberate on this particular night. The mountains in the distance had their snow. The freeway moved its constant, patient river of headlights. She thought about the girl she'd been in the borrowed dress at the wrong party, 17, and trying very hard to take up the right amount of space, which she'd understood even then was an impossible calculation. She thought about the 11 years of making herself smaller than her actual dimensions in certain rooms, not because she lacked confidence in her work, but because there was a part of her that had never fully stopped believing the things she'd been told without words. You don't belong here. She'd believed it in rooms she should have owned. She'd believed it when people paid her well and praised her work, and still she'd felt the edge of not belonging that had been installed in her at 17. She'd believed it about love, specifically. That love was something available to people who already knew their own worth, and she was still working on that calculation. She didn't fully have it now. She wasn't going to pretend she did. The belief that you deserve good things, when you've spent enough time being given evidence to the contrary, doesn't resolve cleanly. You have to choose it, again and again, on regular days and hard days, until the choosing gets easier and eventually, maybe, becomes something close to natural. She was choosing. That was what she'd finally understood, standing at a penthouse window on a city night in December. Not that the fear was gone, not that the wound was fully healed, not that the past had been rewritten into something easier to carry, but that she had the choice of what to do with all of it, and she was finally, actually choosing. Ethan came back into the room and stopped when he saw her at the window. He read something in her posture. She'd noticed that he did that, read her body's language with more fluency than most people managed with her words, and didn't immediately come to her. "You okay?" he said. "Yeah," she said. She meant it. "Come look at the city." He came to stand beside her. She leaned her shoulder against his, which was the kind of small, deliberate contact she'd been learning to stop second-guessing. He put his arm around her, which was the kind of thing that was now ordinary between them, and which she was learning to let be ordinary instead of examining from every angle before allowing it. Below them, the city was enormous and alive and completely indifferent to their specific situation, which was one of the things Lena had always found most comforting about it. The city didn't care. It just went on, and you could find your place in it, or you could keep searching, and either way, it kept its lights on. "I've been thinking about something," she said. "Tell me." When Sophie asked if I was warm, she said, "Like the colors. I've been thinking about that." She looked at the city. "I spent a long time being the version of myself that was useful, competent, good at the work, strong enough not to need anything that wasn't practical." She paused, and I told myself that was enough, that being enough was enough. He was quiet, listening. "But warmth isn't a strategic choice," she said. "It's what happens when you stop managing how much you give away." She turned to look at him. "I don't want to manage it anymore. I'm tired of the management." He looked at her with the expression that had no performance in it. "You don't have to," he said. "I know I don't have to," she said. "I'm telling you I'm choosing not to. There's a difference." "I know there is," he said. And then, "I love you." He said it the way he said things that were true, plainly, without orchestration, without building toward it. Just the fact, stated in the room. She looked at him, felt the words land, felt the part of her that wanted to measure and qualify and protect fall quiet for once. Not because she'd silenced it by force, but because she'd finally given it something real enough to stand down for. "I love you too," she said. I've been around it for a while, circling. I didn't want to say it until I was sure I meant it in the uncomplicated way and not the complicated way. Is it uncomplicated now?" She thought about it honestly. "It's complicated," she said, "but it's real, and I'd rather have the complicated real thing than the clean, simple version of nothing." He put his hand against her face, the way he'd done at the window weeks ago, his thumb against her cheekbone. She put her hand over his again, the cold and the warm. "Yeah," he said. "Me too." They stood there while the city went on below them. At some point, she couldn't have said exactly when, she stopped thinking about it and just let it be what it was. Two people, winter, a lit city, the complicated ongoing work of choosing each other. Later that night, after Ethan had gone to check on Sophie one last time, and Lena was getting her jacket and her bag from the front room, Sophie appeared in the hallway in her pajamas, with Gerald under her arm and the ribbon slightly askew from sleep. "You're leaving," she said. Not a complaint, just fact. She said things directly, which Lena had always found refreshing, and which she recognized as a quality that would make Sophie's life significantly easier in some rooms and significantly harder in others, and she hoped someone would tell her that was a strength. "I am," Lena said, "but I'll be back." Sophie looked at her with the specific evaluating gaze of a child deciding whether to believe something. Then, "Okay," she said. "Good." She turned around and went back to her room, Gerald under her arm, her small, serious footsteps down the hallway. Lena stood there for a moment in the front room of the penthouse, jacket in hand. Something was very full in her chest. She didn't try to name it or contain it. She just let it be there. She put on her jacket and went to the door. And for the first time in 11 years, she wasn't afraid of what was waiting on the other side. Not because the fear had gone, not because the world had become safer or simpler or more certain than it was, but because she'd learned, finally, at 30 years old, the thing that had taken her all this time to learn, that you don't wait until you're not afraid. You walk toward what matters to you while the fear is still present, and you keep walking, and you find out what's on the other side. What was on the other side was ordinary and warm and imperfect and real, which was exactly what she had needed it to be. She took the elevator down. She walked through the amber lobby. She stepped out into the Los Angeles night, which smelled like jasmine from somewhere nearby, and faintly of someone's fireplace, and the particular cold, warm mix of December in a city that doesn't quite commit to winter. She got in her car. She drove home through the lit city, past the billboard on Sunset. Her billboard, the amber and the warmth and the interrupted moment. And this time she didn't pull over to look at it. She knew what it said. She'd built it. She already knew what she was worth.